It is not a dream. It is not a scam. It is the specific promise currently echoing through the halls of power in Washington. A dividend of at least $2,000 per person, promised directly to the American people. But as we enter a new era of economic policy, the question on everyone's mind is no longer just if this will happen, but exactly when it will land in your bank account. The details emerging from the White House are complex, and the political stakes could not be higher. This is the story of the proposed $2,000 stimulus check, the tariff strategy behind it, and the timeline that could change your financial reality in 2026. Since returning to the White House, President Donald J. Trump has aggressively floated the concept of a massive payout to American citizens. This is not just a random idea. It is a central pillar of his economic vision to mark his administration's victories. The proposal involves using the revenue generated from new, aggressive global tariffs. The logic is straightforward. Place heavy levies on foreign imports, collect that money, and instead of letting it disappear into the general government fund, return it directly to the American people. It is framed as a way to take money from foreign competitors and give it back to the citizens who build this country. But does the White House actually have the will to make this happen? The signals coming from the administration are clear. When pressed on whether citizens should expect a $2,000 proposal, White House officials have confirmed that they are committed to the concept. Economic advisors are actively exploring every legal option to get this done. While there may not be a finalized public schedule yet, the president's intent has been made unmistakable. He wants this money in the hands of the people. Now, let's look at the timeline, because this is where the story gets interesting. While the White House keeps the precise calendar close to the vest, key Republican leaders have begun to paint a picture of when this could happen. Scott Bessent, a central figure in the administration's economic planning, has indicated that these checks could reach Americans within the first 3 months of 2026. This is the window we are watching. It could arrive early in the year, perhaps around Valentine's Day, or stretch into March. The political strategy suggests a rollout that aligns with the time families are feeling the pinch of winter expenses and looking ahead to tax season. However, understanding the mechanics of this check is crucial. There is a massive difference between a check going to a household and a check going to every individual. According to recent communications, the plan leans toward a per-person distribution. This is a game changer. Let's do the math. If a family of 5 receives $2,000 for every adult and every dependent, that single household sees a staggering $10,000. That kind of capital infusion has the power to alter the economic landscape overnight. Yet, there are looming questions about eligibility. Will there be a cap? Will it phase out for high earners? While Trump has signaled a focus on low- and middle-income Americans, there is still debate about where the line is drawn. Some insiders suggest an income threshold, perhaps around $100,000, while others argue for a universal distribution to maximize the economic impact. This debate is happening right now, and the outcome determines whether you receive a check. We must also talk about the engine driving this money, tariffs. This is the controversial part of the narrative. While the rebate sounds wonderful, the funding source is causing alarm among many economists. A tariff is essentially a tax on imports. History and economic data show that American importers often pay these costs, and they frequently pass those expenses on to consumers in the form of higher prices. This means that while you might be getting a $2,000 check, you could be paying higher prices at the grocery store and the gas pump every single day. Analysts warn that this creates a cycle where the government gives you money with one hand, but inflation takes it away with the other. This brings us to the harsh reality of the current economy, which explains exactly why this proposal is so tempting to so many. The American consumer is under siege. According to data from Gallup and major financial networks, grocery prices have skyrocketed, rising by over 20% in just the last 3 years. Housing costs, insurance premiums, and utility bills have all climbed to uncomfortable highs. The affordability crisis is not a political talking point, it is a daily struggle for millions. A $2,000 check is not just a bonus. For many, it is a lifeline. It is a temporary reprieve from the pressure of rising costs. This creates a fascinating political dynamic. Analysts suggest that the administration is keenly aware of this pain. By timing the release of these checks, they can potentially regain trust and solidify support ahead of critical election cycles. It is a move designed to provide tangible proof that the government is fighting for the worker.
Let's just jump right in.
But critics argue it is a Band-Aid.
I want you to imagine for a second waking up and seeing an extra $2,000 in your bank account. No yield commitment, a relentless focus on this specific kind of relief.
It does. When you see an idea like this keep coming back cycle after cycle, it tells you it's a major priority. It signals to lawmakers that the administration is not going to let this go.
So it's about sustained political will. They want to get direct financial relief to people who are struggling.
Exactly. And that commitment is tied to a specific funding idea that's meant to sidestep the biggest criticism of past stimulus packages.
Which is always the deficit, right?
Yeah.
How are you going to pay for it?
Always. This payment is being discussed as a kind of profit sharing, with the money coming specifically from tariff revenues.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because, my first thought, and the interviewer in that clip brought this up, isn't using tariff money for this a bit like taking debt to pay off debt?
That's the pushback. Yeah.
I mean, that tariff money already goes somewhere in the budget, right? It funds other things or pays down the deficit. So if you pull it out, aren't you just creating a hole somewhere else?
That is the essential question about how federal funds actually work. And, in reality, most of that money just goes into one big pot at the Treasury. So calling it tariff money is more of an accounting choice.
A way to frame it.
Exactly. But the Treasury Secretary gave some important context there. He said they're looking at, and I'm quoting, a lot of options for funding. And he very quickly pointed out that the recent big tax bill is also financing the president's agenda.
So the idea is that other changes could free up funds, which lets them use the tariffs for this.
That's the narrative. The key thing for you to understand isn't the nitty-gritty of the accounting, it's the intent. The administration is trying to fund this in a way they can sell as not adding to the debt.
They want to offer relief while also looking fiscally responsible to the critics.
It's threading a very difficult needle. Direct help for families, but with an eye on the politics of the national debt.
Which brings us to a really important reality check. We have to be crystal clear about where things stand right now.
Yes. This is absolutely crucial for everyone listening, just to manage expectations.
Let's just say it as plainly as we can.
The $2,000 payment has not been agreed upon. It has not been approved yet. It is actively, quote, in discussion. The Treasury is running the numbers. That is the absolute state of play right now.
And there's a huge gap between a promising idea and a signed law.
A huge gap.
And that gap is filled with the legislative journey. It's not quick. It's not easy.
No. You need formal, binding legislation. That means a bill has to be written. It has to go through the House, then the Senate. They have to agree on the exact same text.
And then, and only then, does it go to the president to be signed. It's a long, messy process filled with negotiation. It's not just a switch they can flip.
And understanding that process is so important because it tells us what a realistic timeline looks like, which we'll get to. But before we even worry about when the money might come...
It's to talk about who. Who actually qualifies?
Exactly. Which brings us to the big question of eligibility, the income line in the sand.
All right, this is where we get our first really solid number, straight from the Treasury Secretary himself. He defined the starting point, the preliminary income threshold. The payment would be for families making less than $100,000.
And we need to add some really important context to that number for our audience.
Yeah.
For retirees, for people on SSI or SSDI, $100,000 can sound like a massive amount of money. But in these federal relief programs, that number is almost always the absolute ceiling.
So it's not the target, it's the cutoff. It's who is definitely not eligible.
Precisely. The plan is designed, in their words, for low and middle income people. A household earning $100,000 is often seen as upper middle income. So that number is the line that says if you make more than this, you are out.
Okay, that's a key distinction. So if you make less than that, you're in the running.
Yeah.
But based on past stimulus programs, the final number in the actual law is usually a lot lower than the first proposal, isn't it?
Substantially lower. Congress always tries to target the relief much more narrowly to get the most, bang for the buck. They want the money going to the people who will spend it immediately.
So based on that history, what does the source material project as the real number? The number that will likely be in the final bill?
The projection, based on very similar relief efforts in the past, suggests the final number is likely to be somewhere around $75,000 for a single person.
Okay, $75,000.
And then for a married couple, they might scale that up to about $150,000. That's usually the sweet spot that captures the people who are genuinely struggling with rising costs, but aren't in deep poverty.
So that wiggle room is important for planning. The bottom line for you is this. If your annual income is below, say, $75,000 as an individual, you are squarely in the group this payment is designed to help.
You are absolutely in the discussion. And that brings us to maybe the single biggest worry for so many of our listeners, the tax return myth.
Oh, this is a huge one. We hear about this all the time.
A massive source of anxiety. So many people in our audience, retirees, SSI recipients, they don't file tax returns. Their income is below the filing requirement, and they get terrified that they'll be left out.
They worry they'll have to go hire an accountant or figure out these complicated forms just to get the relief they desperately need.
We need to put that fear to rest right now, based on what the Treasury Secretary himself said. Getting this dividend has, and this is a direct quote, nothing to do with filing a tax return whatsoever.
Let's repeat that. Has nothing to do with filing a tax return.
Zero. This is huge. The administration knows that their target audience often doesn't file. They've already built the system to find you without a tax return.
So how do they do that? If there's no tax form, how does the government know you qualify and where to send the money?
They use the data they already have. If you get Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, the government already knows who you are.
The SSA and the VA have your records.
They have everything. They have your address, they have your direct deposit information, and most importantly, they have the exact record of your annual income from your benefits.
And that system of data matching is reliable.
Extremely. For all the previous stimulus rounds, the Treasury just got a secure, encrypted data file from the Social Security Administration. They run that file against the income limit in the new law.
So if your SSA file shows your income is below the threshold,
You're automatically in. It's as simple as that. The system is specifically designed to work for non-filers in this group.
that is such a critical piece of information. So if you're an older adult or a beneficiary and you don't normally file taxes, do not start worrying about it now.
Please don't. It's totally unnecessary stress. Your
Well-
eligibility is based purely on your income, which they can see from your benefit records.
In fact, being in the system is the fastest way for them to get you the money.
Exactly. Focus on the income number, not the tax forms.
Okay, so understanding eligibility is step one. But the next question is always the most urgent one for people living paycheck to paycheck.
When?
When does the money actually arrive? Let's get into the realistic timeline and the logistics of how you'd get this potential $2,000.
And this is where we have to bring in a big dose of political reality. You know, even though the idea has momentum, the legislative process moves at its own speed, and it's usually not very fast.
We have to give that reality check. You'll see some headlines saying it could be done in a month if they attach it to some must-pass bill.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's possible.
It's the exception, a huge exception. The normal standard process for a bill like this, you're realistically looking at 3 or 4 months, maybe even 6 months.
6 months is a number you should probably have in your head for planning purposes.
Yeah.
Because this needs a formal law, the timeline depends completely on how fast Congress moves. And there are a lot of places they can get bogged down.
So many choke points.
Let's just walk through them quickly so people understand why it takes so long. First, a committee has to draft the bill. That's called a markup.
Then it has to go to the floor of the House for a debate and a vote. Then it has to do the same thing in the Senate.
And this is where it really slows down. What if the House and Senate pass slightly different versions?
Then they have to reconcile them. That means a small group from both sides gets in a room and argues over every single word until they have one identical bill. That step alone can take weeks, sometimes months.
So the big takeaway here is patience. It's much better to prepare for a multi-month wait than to plan your budget around this money showing up in 30 days.
Absolutely. Now, let's assume it passes. The president signs it. How does the $2,000 actually get to you?
Well, the good news here is they're not going to reinvent the wheel. The delivery methods will be exactly what you're already used to for your monthly benefits.
Which means for the vast majority of people, it will come via direct deposit. It'll go right into the same bank account where your Social Security or VA check lands every month.
That's the fastest, safest, and cheapest way for them to do it.
For sure. And for anyone who doesn't use a bank account, there's the Direct Express card.
Right. If you get your monthly benefits on that debit card, the $2,000 will just be loaded onto the card as a one-time payment. Simple.
And then, of course, the fallback is always the traditional paper check in the mail. But it's important to remember that's always the slowest method. It can take weeks longer than the electronic payments.
Okay, let's talk about delays.
Yeah.
Because when they send out millions of payments, things can go wrong. What do you do if your neighbor gets their payment, but yours is nowhere to be found?
First thing is don't panic. The Treasury sends these out in batches, not all at once. It can take several business days, sometimes even a full week, for all the payments to go out.
So what's the specific advice? How long should you wait before you start trying to call someone?
I would say wait at least 5 full business days after the official payment date. If you call on day 1, you'll just be stuck on hold with everyone else, and they probably won't have an answer for you anyway.
Give the system a chance to work.
Exactly. Let the backlog clear. Then, if it's still missing, you have a much better chance of getting a real answer.
That's great practical advice. Now, before we move on to the really critical financial protections, you mentioned the Treasury Secretary brought up another potential financial boost.
He did. Separate from the $2,000 dividend, he said that a lot of people are expected to see, in his words, huge tax refunds coming in early next year because of some recent tax law changes.
So while that's not the same thing, it's part of the same overall story, isn't it? The administration is looking for multiple ways to get money into people's pockets to help with these high costs.
It's a multi-pronged approach. Direct payments, tax policy. They're trying to ease the burden from a few different angles.
Okay, so let's get back to the $2,000 payment and talk about something vital for our audience, the safety net. How do we make sure this payment helps and doesn't accidentally hurt people?
This is maybe the most important section for our low-income listeners, because a one-time payment can have unintended consequences for the other benefits you rely on to survive.
We have to separate the audience a bit here, right? For people just on Social Security retirement or SSDI, the big question is taxes.
Exactly. But for anyone on SSI Supplemental Security Income or Medicaid, this conversation is about survival. Because your eligibility is tied to incredibly strict income and asset limits.
Are you ready for a fascinating?
It really is.
Our journey starts by systematically examining the combined weight of these official statements, because understanding that unified front is really the only way to gauge this proposal's true political viability. Okay, let's unpack this official commitment. This is the first layer of evidence, and it's so critical because it shows coordination.
It really does.
It's not just one person talking on background or, testing the political waters.
No.
It's a unified message, delivered in quick succession, almost as if they are actively trying to generate the public demand needed to push this legislation through.
That coordinated rollout is the critical takeaway here. When you see policy announcements delivered simultaneously by key economic personnel, the head of Treasury, and the communications staff,
It sends a signal.
it signals that the proposal has moved past that preliminary internal review and has been officially sanctioned as a key immediate administration objective.
So where do we start?
Let's start with the economic heavy hitter, because his job is to provide the fiscal foundation for all these promises. The first crucial piece of evidence comes from Kevin Hassett, the administration's economic advisor.
Okay.
And his role is not political hype. His job is to provide the fiscal rationale, to analyze the economic impact, and to crunch the numbers necessary to make a policy feasible.
So when he speaks on viability, he's not just freelancing.
No, he is speaking with the backing of the White House's internal research team.
Okay, so what did Hassett specifically confirm about the process? Because this is where the conversation really shifts from just generalized political promises to, concrete procedural facts that reveal how deep the planning really is.
He confirmed 2 major procedural facts that are essential for our listeners to understand. First, he was asked directly if the $2,000 checks derived from tariff revenue would happen, and he stated unequivocally that this plan will require legislation.
That's vital information.
It is. It means this is not something the president can just enact with a stroke of the pen, through an executive order.
Congress has to act.
Congress must introduce, debate, and pass a bill. So for our listeners, that means the timeline is dependent entirely on the speed, the cooperation, and frankly, the political will of lawmakers.
Requiring legislation immediately introduces political friction, certainly.
Yeah.
But Hassett's second point seems to indicate the White House is already far past that initial conceptual hurdle.
Right. He also confirmed that he is actively studying the matter and getting the numbers straight.
And why is he doing that?
So the president can make a final informed decision on the specific design of the payment.
Wow. Okay, so if Hassett, the guy who's responsible for the administration's economic modeling and costing, if he's actively crunching the numbers on the funding source,
which we will get into in a moment,
and defining the specific eligibility criteria, then this proposal is fully operational. It's undergoing deep research inside the White House policy framework right now.
Precisely. They are trying to build the legislative blueprint as we speak. His involvement alone raises the credibility of this proposal significantly.
So it moves from potential political rhetoric to...
A serious, internally researched fiscal undertaking.
And just to put Hassett's involvement in perspective here, most large, complicated financial relief programs, they often take months to get to this level of modeling.
That's a great point.
The fact that the economic advisor is speaking publicly about the legislative need in the active study phase suggests a very accelerated internal timeline.
So moving from that essential economic groundwork to the political and implementation backing, we then had confirmation from two other extremely high-profile figures.
Which signals commitment from where?
From the financial mechanism and the communications arm of the administration.
Okay, so Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he confirmed departmental involvement.
He did.
And while the source material we analyzed doesn't really detail his exact quotes on eligibility, the simple fact that the head of the Treasury is publicly addressing this, that confirms the government's financial arm is actively engaged in the planning. His department would be the one ultimately responsible for issuing the checks or deposits.
Through existing structures, like the Bureau of Fiscal Service and coordinating with the SSA.
Right. And then you have the official White House communications channel.
A press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. And her job is to deliver the definitive official position of the administration, leaving zero room for media misinterpretation.
Her statement acted as the ultimate public mandate.
It did. That is the definition of a binding public statement.
Yeah.
Leavitt stated plainly, and this is a quote, "The White House is committed to making that happen." Yes.
Yes, just point blank.
Point blank. And that the team is currently exploring all legal options to get that done.
And that phrase, exploring all legal options, that just reaffirms Hassett's point about the legislative necessity, right? They want to make sure they have the strongest legal basis possible.
It all connects. The trio of Hassett for fiscal viability, Bessent for implementation, and Leavitt for the public mandate, all speaking in quick succession. It creates this immense coordinated pressure on Congress to act. And then finally, this escalating commitment was cemented directly by the president himself.
In writing.
In two separate written posts, one from Sunday and one from Monday. This effectively reinforced their stance on the $2,000 payment promise.
Solidifying it as his personal and immediate policy priority.
Exactly.
The specific language used in those posts is extremely important. It sets the scope of the payment, and it introduces a nuanced distinction that I think we need to clarify for our listeners.
I agree.
The president's crucial language promises a payment of at least $2,000 in the form of a dividend to everybody except high-income people will be paid.
That phrase, at least $2,000, is key. It establishes a floor, not a ceiling.
That's a really important detail.
It is, because it suggests flexibility. The final legislative number could potentially be higher if Hassett's tariff revenue projections are, extremely robust.
Or if Congress decides to use this mechanism to channel additional relief funds.
That's another possibility.
Now, let's go back to that key distinction, addressing some of the feedback we received. The administration keeps using stimulus check and dividend interchangeably. Why is calling it a dividend a key rhetorical and financial strategy?
It's politically sophisticated. A stimulus check traditionally implies government spending funded by taxes or debt aimed at boosting a sluggish economy.
Right.
A dividend, in this context, suggests a payout to the nation's citizens derived from a common pre-existing asset or revenue stream, in this case, the tariffs.
So it reframes the whole issue.
Completely. It suggests the payment is not a cost borne by taxpayers, but rather a share of the profits or revenue generated by trade policy. This framing is deliberate. It's designed to support the financial justification we're about to discuss, and it makes the entire proposal sound much more fiscally responsible.
So to summarize this section, the evidence is pretty overwhelming that this is a fully sanctioned, intensely researched, and publicly mandated policy objective of the administration.
They're all rowing in the same direction.
Which significantly increases the political stakes for Congress. Okay, here's where this proposal moves from just being interesting to being fundamentally different from past relief efforts. The proposed mechanism for funding this $2,000 payment is not general revenue or traditional deficit spending.
No, it's the redirection of specific tariff revenue streams.
It's a bold move.
It's a very bold move. By identifying a dedicated, non-traditional funding stream like tariffs, the administration is attempting to circumvent the inevitable criticism from fiscal conservatives and deficit hawks that this is just another massive expenditure.
They're trying to preempt the budgetary argument.
Exactly.
So let's look at the financial justification provided by the economic advisor Hassett. He laid out the arithmetic, he claimed, and this is a quote, "If you look at how much tariff revenue has been coming in, then there would actually be enough room to cover those checks and not go into the rest of the budget."
That is the pivotal statement. That's what gives the entire policy its perceived viability.
He's claiming that the current inflow of money from tariffs is sufficient to finance $2,000 checks for the targeted low and middle income population.
And the implication is profound. The economic advisor, the person who is expected to have mastery over the data, is using a specific available revenue stream to justify the payment,
which is designed to shield the proposal from immediate budgetary conflicts.
by arguing it is an affordable, viable, and self-funding endeavor.
And this directly supports that dividend narrative we just discussed.
It does.
Instead of tariffs being seen as a cost that's ultimately passed on to the consumer, a hidden tax, if you will, they're reframed as an asset.
A national revenue source that is directly distributed back to the very consumer who paid them.
Exactly.
And this justification creates strong political momentum because it gives lawmakers who are, sensitive to the national debt a compelling argument for passage.
They can say, we are providing substantial financial relief without adding to the national debt or tapping into existing programs.
That's the narrative. And whether or not it holds up under strict academic scrutiny, that's what matters in the halls of Congress right now. It is the political engine driving this proposal.
But we have to be diligent. We have to address the necessary financial scrutiny. The source material we looked at notes that the numbers being calculated by Hassett, quote, on a year-over-year basis, don't really add up, according to some external analysis.
This is where we need the deep dive.
Yes.
This is the friction point where policy meets reality. When the administration claims a massive targeted relief program is fully funded by a single revenue stream, external number crunchers, independent think tanks, opposition party economists, the Congressional Budget Office,
The CBO.
they will inevitably dissect the figures. This isn't unusual. This is the legislative process in action.
Wait, so the top financial advisor for the administration is pushing numbers that external analysis suggests are soft or maybe incomplete. Isn't that a massive red flag that this might just be political posturing?
Well,
Designed purely to gain public support, and that Congress will just immediately dismantle the funding mechanism.
that's the exact question we need to ask. It's possible that Hassett's calculation relies on different accounting methods than those used by his external critics.
For instance,
For instance, he might be utilizing gross tariff revenue projections without subtracting the crucial administrative costs required to collect and enforce the tariffs.
or the costs to actually disperse the $2,000 checks.
That too. Those costs aren't zero.
So he's presenting the top-line revenue without the necessary operating expenses. That significantly changes the true net availability of the money.
Precisely. Another factor could be the population estimate. If Hassett's calculation relies on a very aggressive exclusion of high-income earners, let's say assuming only 60% of the population qualifies, the total cost would be much lower.
Which makes the tariff revenue look sufficient.
Right. But external critics may be scoring the program based on a broader eligibility assumption, which would immediately push the costs way beyond the tariff revenue pool.
So the conflict isn't necessarily that the tariff money doesn't exist,
No, the money is there.
but that the cost of the program, based on a realistic legislative scope and administrative overhead, likely exceeds the net funds Hassett is claiming are available.
That's the most accurate assessment. However, and this is the important part, so what remains? Despite the external skepticism, the administration's top economic advisor is publicly vouching for the viability of tariff funding.
And that creates the political momentum.
Strong political momentum. It supports the narrative that this is an affordable, viable plan. For the purposes of getting a bill passed, the political viability, the ability to tell a compelling story about a dedicated funding source that often outweighs the academic debate on the exact arithmetic.
It's essentially presenting Congress with a prepackaged plan that includes both the benefit and the perceived funding mechanism.
Which makes their job easier and their refusal harder.
It changes the debate from where will we find the money to do you oppose returning tariff revenue to the people? That's a much harder political position to defend against. This moves us to the most pressing question for you, the listener. What do we know about the specific income requirements? And does that phrase, dividend to everybody, truly mean what it sounds like?
We have to synthesize the two different, but I think complementary eligibility criteria that have been presented by the administration officials themselves.
And while the final legislative details aren't set,
the direction is unequivocally clear. This is targeted relief aimed at the low and middle class. The first data point on eligibility came from the economic advisor, Hassett. He specifically mentioned a rebate for families making less than, say, $100,000.
Okay, so that's a concrete middle-class income threshold.
And most benefit recipients fall well below that.
And the second data point came directly from the president with the broader promise of a payment to everybody except high-income people.
Right. So when you interpret the overlap, the clear intention is to target the entire spectrum of low and middle-income Americans and explicitly exclude the wealthy.
This distinction is immensely crucial for our listening audience.
It is. If the income cap lands anywhere near that $100,000 mark for a family, or even slightly lower for individuals, say $50,000 or $75,000.
It strongly suggests inclusion for nearly all current federal benefit recipients.
Yeah.
Let's connect that directly to our core audience who rely on federal benefits. The vast majority of people receiving Social Security retirement benefits, SSDI or SSI.
Social Security, disability insurance, and supplemental security income.
Their incomes are significantly below that $100,000 threshold. In fact, most SSI recipients have near zero or extremely low other countable income.
So, based on the stated intent, the proposed income caps virtually guarantee inclusion for these groups.
It seems like it.
This is clearly targeted relief for the most financially vulnerable citizens and those who have felt the pinch of inflation the hardest over the last few years. The payment is clearly aimed at providing economic support to communities where every single dollar makes a difference.
However, we do need to acknowledge the uncertainty. When Hassett was asked if that $100,000 threshold was final, he hesitated.
He did. He said, We haven't. It's in discussion.
It's in discussion.
Which reiterates a necessary point of caution. The final income cutoff is still in discussion. They haven't decided on that yet.
And for the average retiree whose income is fixed and predictable, this might not seem like a major variable.
But for certain benefit recipients, specifically those on means-tested programs, the fine print of that cutoff definition is everything.
Why does that ambiguity matter so intensely for groups like SSI recipients or, say, SSDI beneficiaries who may be working part-time?
It matters because of the technical definitions in the final bill. The legislation will determine several critical factors.
Like what?
First, what constitutes family income? Is it based on last year's tax return? Current benefit income? A combination? We don't know.
Okay.
Second, for working SSDI beneficiaries who have strict substantial gainful activity limits, SGA limits, we need clarity on whether this $2,000 payment counts toward their monthly income threshold.
The intent suggests it shouldn't, but the law has to say so explicitly.
It has to.
So we're waiting for the legislative language to define precisely how that $100,000 threshold interacts with these complex benefit systems.
Right.
Until that legislative draft is public, the inclusion of, say, SSI or working SSDI beneficiaries remains a projection based on the stated intent, not a legal certainty that safeguards their current benefits.
Exactly. The administration has made their intent clear to help low and middle income earners, but the legislative language must explicitly translate that intent into rock-solid protection for those relying on federal assistance to survive.
We have to temper all this enthusiasm with realism and process. The question isn't if the administration wants it to happen.
No, that's clear.
But how and when it can realistically move through the legislative gauntlet. This is the difference between a high-profile commitment and a delivered check in your bank account.
This is where we shift focus from the White House's intention to Congress's mechanics. And the path forward is complicated, and clarity on the timeline is currently the single biggest missing piece of information. As we've established from Kevin Hassett, this measure absolutely requires Congress. The current process is the administration studying the options and finalizing the details of their proposal.
But lawmakers have to introduce and pass the bill.
They do. And given the political importance, this will likely be pursued through a dedicated standalone bill or perhaps attached to a larger must-pass piece of funding legislation to ensure its passage.
So it doesn't get stalled by political opposition.
Exactly.
Now, the source material did mention the reported warming up of lawmakers to the idea. In legislative terms, that political momentum is the first crucial sign of life for any major spending proposal.
It is. When lawmakers see their constituents reacting positively and with urgency to a presidential announcement of this magnitude, they become significantly more motivated to deliver.
The administration's tactic of generating that intense, unified public commitment, it increases the political cost of opposing the payment.
Absolutely. And the fact that the funding is claimed to come from tariff revenue, not general debt, also provides political cover for those lawmakers who might otherwise oppose new spending.
It gives them a defensible reason to vote yes.
It does.
However, we still have to acknowledge the reality. We don't even have a bill number yet. The administration is still crafting the foundational documents.
Indeed. And since the White House is still exploring all legal options, and Press Secretary Leavitt confirmed she has no timeline, we currently have no specific delivery dates.
We have a commitment, but no execution schedule.
That's a good way to put it.
And for our listeners who need to budget, the lack of a timeline is frustrating. But we can use historical context from past relief payments to paint a picture of what a realistic administrative timeline might look like once the bill is passed.
We can. Based on previous relief packages, the moment the president signs the legislation, the Treasury, in coordination with the Social Security Administration and the VA, enters a, say, 4 to 6 week administrative preparation phase.
And what happens during that time?
This time is used to load payment files, update IT systems, finalize procedures for non-tax filers, and ensure they have current banking information for every single beneficiary.
So if a bill were to pass next month, for example, the payments would likely start arriving 6 to 8 weeks after that signing date.
That's a reasonable estimate.
And we often see a tiered distribution based on historical data, correct?
Yes. Based on precedent, payments are often staggered. The first wave typically goes to those who receive benefits via direct deposit and who have clear tax records on file with the IRS.
Okay, and after that?
Following that, there is often a sequence based on benefit type. Social Security retirement, then SSDI, then SSI, and finally VA benefits. Payments are also sometimes staggered by birth date. For example, beneficiaries born on the 1st through the 10th of the month might receive theirs first.
And what about the physical methods of delivery? That's really important for seniors and disabled individuals, many of whom rely on specific systems.
We expect the methods to align perfectly with existing government disbursement systems. This means direct deposit will be the fastest.
And paper checks.
Paper checks will be mailed out for those who still receive benefits that way, which inevitably adds a layer of delay due to postal processing.
And crucially, the Direct Express card.
Crucially, yes. We expect the money to be loaded onto the Direct Express card system for many SSI and SSDI recipients. The administration will leverage the SSA and VA's existing payment files to expedite the process as much as possible.
What about those who use representative payees? People who manage the funds for beneficiaries, who are unable to manage their own finances.
That is a key logistical hurdle. It requires specific administrative guidance, which contributes to the delay. Treasury and the SSA must formalize procedures for how the $2,000 dividend is delivered to the payee, ensuring transparency and accountability for the beneficiary.
So until the legislative guidance is established, those details remain fluid.
They do. So until the legislative draft is released, the best advice remains preparedness. Ensure your address and direct deposit information on file with the SSA or VA is current, and monitor the official portals for updates.
Exactly. We have to wait for that legislative draft to move this conversation from a high-level commitment to physical execution.
This next section is paramount. When substantial money is being discussed, we absolutely need to address financial safeguards and critical protections for the beneficiary community. For our listeners on fixed or limited incomes, ensuring this $2,000 does not negatively impact their existing support like health insurance or food assistance is just as important as receiving the money itself.
This is where the fine print dictates survival. If the government fails to explicitly legislate protections, this $2,000 dividend could inadvertently become a financial trap that costs the recipient much more in lost benefits than they gained. First, let's nail down the necessary clarity on tax status. Will this $2,000 dividend be counted as taxable income, or will it be designated as tax-free relief?
Well, based on the administration's use of the term dividend from tariff revenue, it could technically be subject to taxation, depending on how the final legislative language designates it.
So Congress has to act.
Congress must explicitly designate it as a non-taxable grant, similar to past stimulus payments, to ensure the full $2,000 provides benefit. If it's taxable, even if the overall tax burden is low, it diminishes the impact, and it creates unnecessary complexity for seniors who might not otherwise file taxes.
The second, and far more serious concern, relates to means-tested programs, and this is a critical expansion of detail. We need explicit protection against impact on federal benefits like SSI, Medicaid, and SNP.
Absolutely. For low-income programs, the rules are unforgiving. Let's use SSI, Supplemental Security Income, as the clearest example.
Okay.
SSI recipients face two major tests, an income test and a resource test. The resource test states that an individual cannot have more than $2,000 in countable resources, like money in a bank account, at the end of the month.
Or they lose their benefits.
Exactly.
That is a tiny cap. For many people, that $2,000 is their total savings buffer.
Precisely. Now imagine a struggling SSI recipient receives the $2,000 dividend in their checking account. If they already had $500 saved, their total resource count jumps to $2,500.
Which is $500 over the limit.
This $500 excess immediately violates the $2,000 resource limit, meaning they could lose their next SSI payment and potentially face a difficult administrative review to regain eligibility.
And the worst part is the immediate cascading impact.
Right.
Losing SSI often means automatically losing associated state Medicaid or SNP benefits, which are essential for healthcare and food security. The $2,000 payment would cost them critical long-term support.
This is why the legislative solution is so vital. We have to monitor for clear language ensuring these vital funds do not jeopardize existing support.
Specifically,
The legislation must include what is known as a period of disregard. This means Congress explicitly tells the SSA, the VA, and state welfare agencies to ignore this specific payment for a defined period. Historically, it's been 12 months, treating it as if it never existed for resource or income calculation purposes.
without that specific protective language written into the bill, the $2,000 can become a financial hazard.
A huge hazard.
So when the bill is released, you need to check immediately if it contains specific wording that guarantees the money will be treated as an exempt asset for at least the first 12 months you possess it. This is the difference between relief and ruin for the most vulnerable. Beyond protecting benefits, we have to address debt collection. For many struggling seniors or SSDI recipients, outstanding medical debt or consumer loans are a major burden. If they receive this money via direct deposit, will it be safe from seizure?
We saw the scenario play out with previous relief payments. While standard federal benefits, like Social Security and VA benefits, are generally protected from garnishment before they're deposited.
Once the money hits a bank account.
It can become vulnerable to seizure by third parties, such as private debt collectors, unless specific temporary legislation is passed to shield those funds.
Therefore, the bill must include specific language to protect the $2,000 funds from garnishment by debt collectors, ensuring the money provides the needed relief directly to you, the listener, and doesn't just disappear to satisfy an old, often predatory debt.
This protection is often called a look-back period. The legislation needs to mandate that banks cannot comply with garnishment orders related to these specific relief funds for a certain period. This is the only way to guarantee the funds meet their stated goal of providing breathing room and stability, especially for those with low balances and old judgments against them.
This discussion of large, anticipated payments brings us to the single most important safety measure we can offer.
I agree.
A strong, detailed warning against the inevitable, anticipated scams that will flood mailboxes, phones, and computers once this news hits the mainstream.
Scammers are professionals at exploiting the high hopes and urgent needs of vulnerable populations when big, unexpected money is promised. We need to be absolutely crystal clear about how the government handles official contact.
So listen carefully to this warning. The IRS, the Social Security Administration, and the VA will never call, text, or email you demanding information, money, or verification details to receive this $2,000 payment.
Never.
They will never ask you to pay a processing fee, purchase gift cards, or provide credit card or checking account information over the phone to unlock or expedite your dividend.
The procedure is simple and absolute. The only trusted information sources regarding this payment are official letters received via the U.S. mail in your verified mailbox or secure verified government portals like the My Social Security portal.
So if someone calls, texts, or emails you about the $2,000 payment,
It is a scam.
it is a scam, and you must hang up immediately. Do not engage. Do not confirm any detail.
And if you encounter suspicious contact, report it. You should immediately report any attempt to solicit personal or financial information related to this dividend to the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, and the relevant agency's Office of the Inspector General.
Protecting yourself from fraud is the absolutely critical first step in receiving this aid safely and securely. Let's connect this high-stakes commitment to the broader political and economic strategy. Why is the administration pushing so hard for this right now, and what does this payment represent in terms of future economic policy?
Well, this move is strategically aggressive and calculated. It illustrates a clear intent to deliver tangible, immediate financial relief to a key constituency, the low and middle income earners. And it's a strategy explicitly designed to force congressional action. Let's revisit that idea that the administration is painting themselves into an extremely tight corner. This intense, multi-department public commitment is a form of political leverage directed squarely at Congress. By having 3 top officials and the president all confirm the $2,000 payment, they have raised public expectations to a level that failure to deliver would carry extremely significant political consequences for any lawmaker who votes against it.
That public pressure increases the urgency and likelihood of Congress delivering the bill. Lawmakers are extremely sensitive to disappointing a large, organized bloc of voters who have been directly promised relief.
This public relations strategy is specifically designed to bypass the usual bureaucratic inertia and accelerate the process.
And by making the claim that the funds are available now via tariff revenue, they are neutralizing one of the primary legislative arguments against the relief, which is the cost.
Right. This leaves lawmakers with fewer legitimate fiscal reasons to block the measure, forcing them to take a potentially unpopular political stand against direct relief.
Now, this payment is fundamentally different from routine cost of living adjustments, or COLA, for Social Security, and that distinction is key.
It is.
It represents a novel use of tariff revenue as an economic tool to provide targeted relief.
It is a critical distinction to grasp. A COLA is an adjustment based on inflation data and is intended solely to maintain purchasing power. This $2,000 dividend is intended as an additional economic boost.
A specific use of dedicated revenue to counteract current economic pressures.
Exactly. And if it's successful, this could illustrate a potentially permanent shift in how federal aid might be structured, using specific, non-general fund revenue streams to bypass traditional budgetary conflicts and deliver direct payments.
It sets a precedent for how specific revenue mechanisms like tariffs, often criticized as a cost, could be repurposed to deliver visible, immediate financial benefits to the same consumers they might otherwise negatively impact.
It connects abstract trade policy directly to the average household budget in the most tangible way possible. If this model proves successful in its legislative execution, we could see it deployed again in future economic cycles as a targeted tool for relief.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's reinforce the most important facts you need to walk away with. This is your essential checklist for clarity and preparedness.
First, the committed payment amount is at least $2,000.
Right.
Second, the commitment level is extremely high, with 3 top officials and the president confirming the plan in quick succession.
Third, the proposed funding source is tariff revenue, which totally alters the political and budgetary dynamic.
Fourth, eligibility is targeted at low and middle income Americans, making inclusion highly likely for those receiving federal benefits, though the final protective language for SSI and Medicaid is still being written.
And finally, the primary barrier and required next step is that legislation must be passed by Congress.
That's the big one.
This potential $2,000 payment represents hope and a necessary lifeline for many struggling with high costs, whether they are retirees managing a fixed income or disabled individuals navigating complex healthcare needs. We are committed to being the objective, authoritative voice guiding you through the legislative process and ensuring you have the clarity and context you need, especially regarding those critical benefit protections every step of the way. Thank you for joining us for this crucial deep dive into the administration's financial commitment. Before we go, let's leave you with a final provocative thought to consider.
Okay.
Considering the administration is justifying this payment based on specific tariff revenue rather than general funds, how does the idea of using non-traditional, dedicated funding sources for immediate financial relief change your perspective on the long-term stability and political viability of federal aid for seniors and low-income citizens? Is this model, which links benefits to specific trade policies, a sustainable or advisable path for future economic support?
And you have to think about how linking a direct benefit to a specific revenue stream might change public support or opposition for that underlying revenue stream itself. It creates a new form of public investment.
It's a fascinating question. We will, of course, continue watching the legislative movement, the specific language of the bill, and the definitions of eligibility, especially for our listeners relying on SSI and other means-tested programs.
And if that legislative draft moves forward this week,
you need to know about it immediately. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update as the legislative process moves forward.
And please share this deep dive with family or friends who need this clarity. Help them understand what is being promised, where the money is expected to come from, and the critical safety steps they need to take right now to protect their existing benefits. We'll catch you on the next.
We have some major news today. The White House has now officially, on the record, confirmed their commitment to distributing a $2,000 payment.
And they're calling it a dividend.
A dividend, right. And this isn't just, some rumor anymore.
No, this is high level, a confirmed promise.
Which could mean $2,000 cash directly in your pocket if you meet the income requirements.
And for so many people, that's not just a little help. That's some real breathing room.
So the big question is, who qualifies? Why now? And what does exploring all legal options really mean for getting this money out?
We're going to get into all of it.
Stay with us for this deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this because we've got a critical, high-profile update, and it's coming directly from the administration about a really significant potential payment.
It is. And our goal here really is to give you clarity.
Exactly. Our mission today is simple. We're just going to cut through all the noise, all the speculation, and frankly, the political talk to get to the facts.
The official statements, the actual commitments, and the context around this potential $2,000 payment.
A payment that's aimed squarely at relieving that financial stress for low to middle income earners.
And I think setting the context right away is so important. This confirmation, it came directly from the White House press secretary.
Right.
So that right there just elevates the whole discussion. We've moved beyond, is this a rumor or is this a proposal?
We're in a totally different phase now.
We are firmly in the commitment stage, so we need to look really closely at what they're promising and maybe what the challenges are that are still ahead.
Okay, so let's just nail down the headline fact right at the top before we get into the weeds.
Please.
The White House is now institutionally, officially backing the distribution of a $2,000 payment. They keep calling it a dividend. And the targeting, it seems crystal clear. They're aiming for, and this is the quote, everyone except high-income people.
And, that distinction, calling it a dividend instead of a stimulus check, that's not just semantics. That's a really important political and legal nuance.
How so? What's the strategy there?
Well, a stimulus check, that term is usually associated with deficit spending, with an act of Congress. It has a certain political baggage.
Right, it sounds like an emergency measure.
Exactly. But by calling it a dividend, they're trying to frame it very differently. Perhaps as a return on national resources or something that doesn't rely on new debt.
So it's a payment that could be authorized under what existing executive authority?
That seems to be what they're aiming for. It's a message that suggests this money is, owed or deserved, not just some temporary economic fix. It's a very deliberate choice of words.
That reframing really does tell us a lot about their strategy here. So let's get into the chain of confirmation, because it wasn't just one announcement. It was a sequence, and it shows just how fast this moved from a proposal to a locked-in administration priority.
It really was a rapid escalation. It started with the president's statement on a Sunday. He announced this specific $2,000 dividend idea.
And right from the start, he was clear that high-income individuals would be excluded.
Yes, that set the anchor right away, both for the dollar amount and for the target demographic.
And this wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark, was it? Because I remember the very next day, He brought it up again.
He did. He doubled down on this exact $2,000 payment. And when the chief executive does that, when they reinforce a major dollar-specific commitment in less than 24 hours,
It's a signal.
it's a very deliberate signal of internal alignment and, frankly, urgency. They were intentionally building public expectation around that $2,000 figure.
Okay, so you have the president setting the tone twice. Then where did the momentum go?
It moved to the financial arm of the government. We then got confirmation from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessing.
And he added a new layer of detail.
A very significant one. He confirmed that detailed discussions were taking place about the logistics of this payment, and he specifically mentioned a target group,
Which was?
individuals with income under $100,000.
Wow. Okay, so that's the first time we hear a hard number attached to the eligibility.
And that's a huge moment because the Treasury is the agency that would actually implement this. So hearing it from them gives the whole proposal these concrete administrative parameters. It's not just a political idea anymore.
But the real definitive statement, the one that sort of locked this in as an official political promise, that came from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt.
Absolutely. That was the linchpin. She was pressed by a reporter in a briefing, and she made it, and I'm quoting her here, very, very clear, that the White House is institutionally committed to distributing this $2,000 comment.
Institutionally committed. That's strong language.
It is. So you see the pattern. The president sets the political vision, the Treasury Secretary lays out the financial parameters, and then the press secretary confirms the public commitment. This is not a trial balloon.
It's a mandate.
It's an administration-wide mandate.
Okay, I get the consistency, and that's powerful. But let me just push back on the enthusiasm for a second here.
Sure.
The fact that they're all repeating the same number so quickly,
Yeah.
that could just be really disciplined messaging, right? And then the press secretary immediately gave that crucial caveat.
The exploring all legal options line.
Exactly. They are currently exploring all legal options to get that done, and she gave no timeline. Now, to anyone who's listened to these briefings, that phrase, exploring all legal options, it often sounds like Washington code for, we don't actually know how to do this yet.
And that's an excellent, very necessary point of skepticism.
So are the sources suggesting this exploration is genuinely productive, or are they just buying time?
The analysis suggests it's genuinely productive, but it's also genuinely difficult. And here's why. If this were a straightforward legislative matter, they would have just introduced a bill in Congress.
Right. There'd be a bill with a name and everything.
Exactly. The fact that you have three of the highest level figures all repeating the $2,000 number, but then also mentioning legal options, that tells us a couple of things. One, they are locked into the dollar amount. And two, they are now in an internal race to find the administrative pathway to make it happen.
So let's dig into that. What could those legal options actually be? Because like you said, this is the bottleneck right now. This is what's stopping the money from flowing. What authority could they be looking at to get around the slow traditional legislative process?
Well, when an administration wants to find a non-traditional administrative way to send out direct payments, they usually look at a few specific existing authorities.
Okay, what's option number one? What's the most likely candidate?
The first, and maybe the most direct, would be using existing Treasury stabilization funds. Or they could be looking at a very broad interpretation of their authority under Title 31 of the U.S. Code.
And what is Title 31?
It's the section that's related to money and finance. It gives the Treasury some pretty broad powers. They might be able to distribute funds administratively if they can tie the action to an existing national priority.
Like the current economic situation.
Exactly, like persistent inflation and the financial stress it's putting on low and middle income families. The argument would be that the current economic strain justifies this administrative dividend under the Treasury's existing regulatory umbrella.
So they'd be using a decades-old statute and applying it to today's reality.
Precisely. Now, the second option, which is a bit more of a stretch, involves interpreting the Stafford Act.
The Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act.
Right. And historically, that's been used for natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, pandemics.
So how would that apply here?
Well, some administrations have tried to invoke certain clauses in the Act to justify broad economic relief, arguing that, severe financial instability or a national economic emergency could fit the criteria for a disaster.
That sounds like something that would get challenged in court immediately.
It absolutely does, which really highlights the difficult position they're in. They're looking for a path of least resistance, and there might not be an easy one.
And is there a third option?
There's a third, less direct option, but one that always gets explored. It involves leveraging authority from executive orders or maybe reinterpreting existing laws about specific benefit payments.
So like adjusting payments from the Social Security Administration or the VA?
Potentially. It could be framed as an advance or a special adjustment, but that's usually very complex because those programs have their own very specific legislative language that's hard to get around.
So the bottom line here is this exploration phase is real. They're on a kind of legal scavenger hunt.
That's a great way to put it. They are on a high-stakes legal scavenger hunt to find the money and the authority to send it because they've committed their institutional reputation to it.
The repetition of that $2,000 number then isn't just messaging.
No, it's a sign that they've made a promise and now they have to find a way to keep it. The pressure on them to deliver now is just enormous given how public and how specific this promise has become.
They've really gone all in.
They have, and failure to deliver the full $2,000 could lead to a catastrophic loss of credibility, especially with the very people they're trying to support.
Okay, so given that intense focus on delivery, let's drill down into what we know about eligibility. This is the practical information that you, our audience, really need to know.
Right. So we start with the broadest message, the one the president used, which was simply everybody except for high-income people.
It's very wide, very inclusive language.
It is. It's designed to be.
Yeah.
But the more specific, more administratively actionable number came from the Treasury Secretary.
Right. When he confirmed they were looking at the details for individuals with income under $100,000.
And for you, the listener, whether you're a retiree living off a moderate pension or a low-income veteran or someone on a fixed income just trying to keep up with costs, that $100,000 figure is absolutely crucial.
Why is it so important?
Because it shows the payment is clearly targeted toward the middle and lower income brackets. It's aimed at the people who have been disproportionately crushed by this current inflationary environment.
That number, it feels like an acknowledgement of where the economic pain actually is. When you think about families making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, their budgets have been strained to the breaking point by housing, food, and energy costs. So setting that ceiling at $100,000, it ensures a really broad segment of the economically anxious public is included.
It really does. It focuses the aid where inflation has had the most destructive effect on, purchasing power and just basic stability.
It's also a strategic choice, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a strategic decision to maximize the public perception of support while still maintaining some degree of fiscal responsibility by excluding the highest earners. It frames the payment as essential relief, not just some generalized stimulus giveaway.
Right. Okay, so let's pivot to the amount itself, the non-negotiable anchor of this whole conversation.
Right.
That $2,000 price tag.
The analysis we've seen suggests the public is, quote, very much sold on this idea of a $2,000 payment.
So that number, that expectation, is now firmly set in the public's mind.
It really is. And this brings us into the realm of behavioral economics, specifically something called the anchoring effect.
Explain that. What's the anchoring effect?
Well, once the administration publicly anchors the expectation at $2,000, any lower number, say, if they came out and offered $600 or $1,000,
people wouldn't see it as a gain.
Exactly. It would be perceived as a painful loss relative to the expectation that was already set. It's a psychological trap.
So the administration is risking a huge amount of public trust if they even think about trying to pull back now.
A significant amount. The analysis we have warns that reducing the figure now would, quote, irritate people more than anything.
It's an asymmetrical risk then.
A very asymmetrical risk. The political benefit of delivering $2,000 is high, for sure, but the political cost of delivering, say, $1,000 is catastrophic. It would disproportionately hurt their credibility.
So, in a way, they've put themselves in their own political trap.
They absolutely have. They can't just deliver some relief anymore. They have to deliver this specific amount of relief.
The commitment to that higher $2,000 figure, it really signals that this payment is designed to be substantial. It's real material relief.
Right. It's something that can actually help bridge a financial gap for a struggling family. It's not just a token gesture that, disappears after one trip to the gas station or the grocery store.
So this means we can be reasonably certain that if the administration successfully navigates these legal options and the money does get delivered,
the amount will be $2,000.
Or maybe even a little more, given the president's tendency to sometimes float higher numbers.
That's possible. but we can be almost certain it won't be less. The political cost of failing to deliver that specific $2,000 figure is now, I think, greater than the administrative and legal cost of finding the means to actually deliver it.
That's a really powerful point. The $2,000 has become this political promise with the force of an institutional commitment.
It has. And reducing it now would just be seen as a profound betrayal, especially by the low-income folks who are really counting on that specific level of support.
And looking at this whole situation, you realize the administration has really maneuvered itself into an extremely precarious political spot. They are, and I'm quoting the analysis again, really painting themselves into an extremely tight corner by so consistently promoting this $2,000 dividend.
It makes the delivery not just a policy decision.
No, it's a high-stakes test of their political competence.
The stakes just could not be clearer. The analysis warns that if they, quote, do not follow through with this, their credibility and their trust is going to go down the toilet.
And you have to remember who they've targeted with this promise.
Exactly. They've specifically targeted low to middle income earners. That's a crucial voting bloc. And it's the group that is currently bearing the absolute brunt of economic anxiety.
So to fail to deliver financial relief to them after making such a specific promise,
it would result in a massive loss of faith among that core constituency. It would be a political disaster.
But this political gamble, it also kind of reflects a deep recognition of financial need, doesn't it?
I think it does. They seem to be willing to take this huge risk of committing publicly before they've even finalized the mechanism, because they believe the financial hardship out there is so severe.
So it requires this level of intervention, and they need to be the ones seen delivering it.
That seems to be the calculation. And we can really understand why $2,000 is the bare minimum acceptable figure when we track the history of the proposed relief amounts just this year.
Right. There's a clear upward trajectory in their own internal assessment of what's needed.
A very clear one. It tells us that those earlier, smaller proposals, they just failed to generate enough political or public momentum.
Which suggests they were just inadequate to meet the challenge.
Let's track that history. Back in February, the initial idea was much more abstract. It was this $5,000 Doge dividend.
Right, that was more of a concept, a very high initial anchor, but maybe less serious in its implementation details.
Exactly. Then the discussion got much more concrete, but also more fiscally conservative in August. That's when we heard about this $600 payment.
And that was tied to the American Worker Rebate Act of 2025.
Right, so that was a legislatively backed figure. But the fact that it was floated and then pretty much ignored or raised immediately tells you that $600 was quickly deemed insufficient.
I mean, for a family dealing with a rent hike or a spike in their utility bills, $600 is a drop in the bucket.
It is. It fails to provide that psychological or material relief that's really needed. So then by early October, the figure had already basically doubled.
That's when the talk was $1,000 to $2,000.
Which indicates a growing political consensus, or maybe, a reaction to their own internal polling, that those lower amounts just weren't addressing the true gravity of the economic climate for middle-class and low-income families.
And that finally brings us to the current commitment, which was set in mid-November.
At least $2,000 or more. The fact that the president has continually increased the number every time he talks about it is a really powerful political signal.
It shows a recognition that $600 or $1,000 just won't move the needle for families on fixed incomes struggling with this inflation.
It has to be substantial to be effective. And now the commitment is firmly locked at the highest end of that scale. They've accepted the premise that the relief must be $2,000 or higher to be both economically effective and politically successful.
And this leads us to a really critical point, the role of public support in all of this.
Yes. The analysis explicitly suggests there's a positive feedback loop here. The more sustained public excitement and support there is for this $2,000 idea, the more momentum it gains.
Making it, quote, more likely it is to actually happening.
Which means the public is an active participant in this outcome. It's not passive.
So if the public were to just, sit here and act like, we don't care about $2,000, as the source puts it.
That lack of interest could genuinely allow the commitment to fade away. They could let it die on the vine.
So public anticipation and continued attention are actually driving political accountability.
They absolutely are. By showing support, by demanding answers, by just keeping this discussion alive, the public is effectively adding more pressure and political necessity to ensure that this commitment is fulfilled.
So that collective voice is what's critical to forcing this $2,000 commitment through whatever complicated administrative process they're exploring.
Exactly. So if you're an individual relying on benefits, a retiree, a low-income worker, and you are counting on this $2,000 dividend, your interest and your sustained attention are actually essential to maintaining the pressure on the White House to find and finalize that legal path forward.
The higher the public anticipation, the less likely they are to fail. Okay, now we come to what is probably the most important section for our listeners who are focused on practical financial planning. What is the current verifiable status of this payment, and what are the crucial logistical details that are still missing? We need to be really clear here.
Yes, let's reemphasize the current state. It is, as we've said, a high-tension scenario. It's commitment versus the delivery mechanism.
So the $2,000 amount has been publicly confirmed as a definite goal, an institutional plan.
But, and this is the big, but it is not yet approved or finalized.
Meaning the entire focus remains on exploring all legal options to figure out how the money can be distributed.
Right. They've confirmed the, $2,000. They've confirmed the coup under $100,000 in income. But the how, the specific legal mechanism, that is the current bottleneck.
And the hope, as you said, is that by looking at these administrative pathways, they can find a quicker route.
A non-traditional, faster route. But that search for legal authority, it creates this void of logistical information that we have to address with, real clarity and compassion for our audience, who are often managing extremely tight, fixed budgets.
So let's be blunt. Since they're still exploring the mechanism, we cannot give you an official timeline.
There is no firm date for when this $2,000 will arrive. We can't give you a date because the authorizing mechanism, the how, is what will define the when.
Furthermore, we have no final details on the physical logistics. How is the money actually going to get to you?
Will it be a direct deposit through the existing Treasury system, the same way you get your Social Security or SSI? Will it be a paper check in the mail? Could they leverage the existing Direct Express cards?
And we don't have any specific schedules, like those ones that divide payments by birth date or benefit type.
Not yet. Without that finalized legal mechanism, those details are impossible to know.
And this is where the detailed analysis for our low to middle income listeners becomes absolutely paramount. Because right now we have zero information about the vital financial protections that are necessary to make sure this $2,000 is actually helpful and not, harmful.
Let's break down the three biggest logistical unknowns that could cause harm: tax status, garnishment protection, and benefit cliffs.
Let's start with tax status. For so many of our listeners, especially those on SSI or whose only income is Social Security, they need to know, will this $2,000 be taxable or tax-free? Why is that so critical?
Well, if the $2,000 is authorized as a taxable benefit, which can happen if it's framed as, say, an advanced tax credit or some form of earned income, it could force people who don't normally file taxes to have to file.
Or worse, it could generate a tax liability that they just can't afford.
Exactly. Historically, when these kinds of relief payments have been framed as a gift payment or a rebate, they've been tax-free. But until the White House announces the specific authorizing language they're using, we cannot guarantee whether this $2,000 will be protected from federal or state taxes. It's a huge missing piece of financial planning information.
Okay, next up, let's talk about the benefit cliff. This is a major fear for anyone on means-tested assistance. How would a $2,000 lump sum payment affect your eligibility for critical programs like SNA, Medicaid, or housing assistance?
This is, I think, the most serious risk for low-income beneficiaries. Many of these means-tested programs like SSI or SNAP have very strict limits on the assets and the income a person can have.
So give us an example.
Okay, a listener who relies on SNAP or food stamps might have a very low asset limit they have to stay under. If they receive a $2,000 lump sum, and that money is not legally designated as an excluded resource,
You could push them over the limit.
it could temporarily push them over that limit, which could jeopardize months of essential food aid, or even more critically, their health coverage through Medicaid.
That is a terrifying thought. A $2,000 payment that's meant to provide breathing room could ironically cause a catastrophic loss of essential benefits.
Precisely. I mean, if you lose your Medicaid coverage, that $2,000 payment becomes almost meaningless compared to the cost of a single major medical bill.
So what do we need to see?
We need to see the final legal mechanism explicitly state that this $2,000 dividend is excluded from consideration as income or an asset for all federal means-tested benefit programs. Until that legal clarification is made, recipients face a real acute financial risk.
And finally, garnishment protection. For those of you out there struggling with back taxes or medical debt or other obligations, will this $2,000 be safe from debt collectors?
This protection is absolutely vital. We saw with past relief payments that specific legislative language was required to shield those funds from both private and public debt collection.
Things like garnishments for overdue student loans or even child support payments.
All of it. If the administration uses an executive action or an interpretation of Title 31, the authorizing document must contain explicit language that grants this payment immunity from garnishment. Without that explicit protection, that $2,000 could literally vanish the moment it hits the bank account of someone who is struggling with debt.
So to sum this up, the political commitment to the $2,000 figure seems absolute, but the practical usefulness of it for low-income individuals hinges entirely on these three missing protections: tax status, benefit protection, and garnishment protection.
Yes, we have to maintain a logical, critical mind here. The commitment is real, the political pressure is intense, but until the administration announces the specific legal mechanism they are using, all of those vital logistical details, the when, the how, and the critical protections that make the payment safe for you to receive, they remain the next pieces of information we are all urgently waiting for.
So your job, as the informed and financially conscious listener, is to understand that the $2,000 is confirmed as a promise, but the practical delivery is still pending the successful completion of this White House legal exploration. And we will be tracking the moment they announce that mechanism.
Because that is the moment all of these critical logistical details will suddenly become clear.
And we will finally know if this $2,000 is truly safe for you to receive. Okay, let's quickly reinforce the most important facts from this deep dive so you walk away with the confirmed truth and a clear understanding of what's next.
First, the amount. The White House, at the absolute highest levels, is politically locked into the $2,000 payment. The anchoring effect makes the political cost of reducing that amount just too high for them to backtrack now.
Second, the target. All discussions confirmed they are focusing on those with income under that $100,000 threshold. That specifically targets the middle and lower income brackets who are most strained by inflation.
And third, the status. It is not approved yet. But officials are actively, urgently seeking an administrative pathway. They're exploring all available legal options to make it happen outside of the potentially slow process of congressional approval.
And if we connect all this to the bigger picture, this commitment to $2,000, it really highlights the political recognition that substantial financial aid, not just some token payment, is desperately needed right now.
It is. It's an admission that they need to address the persistent economic challenges for fixed-income families and low-income workers in a meaningful way.
And this high-stakes hunt for a legal option, it really demonstrates an urgency to deliver this money as fast as possible.
It does. The administration is in a genuine race to fast-track real money to real people. But the moment they choose that legal path is the moment we will finally get the answers on tax, benefit, and garnishment protections that actually make this payment useful and safe for you.
This level of commitment is rare, and it shows that you, the low to middle income earners across the country, you are being seen and heard in your urgent need for financial support. We're going to continue to track every single detail, especially the announcement of those specific legal mechanisms and the timelines and protections that come with it.
So you know exactly when this crucial $2,000 relief is set to arrive, and more importantly, whether it is financially safe for you to receive.
The analysis gave us a powerful final thought to leave you with, suggesting that public momentum drives political action. So for you, the listener, the ultimate question is this: how strong is your support for this $2,000 dividend, and how will that collective, sustained attention ensure the promise is kept and the money is delivered with all the necessary financial protections in place?
Don't miss the moment those crucial logistical details drop, because that is the moment this commitment becomes real-world cash flow for you.
We strongly encourage you to subscribe right now and turn on those notifications so you never miss an important update on this $2,000 payment. Please like this deep dive, share it with your friends or family who also need this financial help, and comment below with your questions and your perspectives on this institutional commitment.
We thrive on your insights and engagement.
We'll catch you on. There is some major financial news making the rounds right now. We're talking about a potential cash injection, one designed very specifically for low and middle income Americans.
And that includes, importantly, folks on fixed benefits.
It really could be a game changer. We're talking about relief that, if it happens, it could fundamentally change the family budget for millions of people almost overnight.
That's absolutely right. This isn't just, idle chatter. The proposal is for a dividend payment of at least $2,000 per person.
$2,000.
And the part that has everyone buzzing is how they plan to pay for it. The funding mechanism is, well, it's a massive influx of tariff revenue.
Trillions, right?
Oh.
That's the number being thrown around.
Government projections are suggesting this could bring in trillions of dollars for the U.S. Treasury over the next 10 years.
So the big question, the one everyone is asking, is this money actually coming? Is it another political promise that just, fades away?
And who qualifies?
Exactly. Who qualifies? This is so important, especially if you rely on a fixed income. I'm talking about Social Security, SSI, SSDI. And then there's the math. We have to unpack the financial side of paying for something that costs over $500 billion.
And today, that's what we're doing. We are taking a really critical deep dive into the specifics of this new proposal. We're going to look at the eligibility confusion, and we'll use some historical examples to try and define what low and middle income actually means.
And we'll dig into the money. Is it financially feasible? We'll dissect that tariff income projection and the mechanics of, how the government would have to borrow.
And finally, and this is crucial, we have to place this in a political context. This is the fourth time we've seen a proposal like this in less than a year.
Fourth time.
So stay tuned. We are going to get you absolute clarity on this potential $2,000 benefit.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is, it's laser-focused and it's vital. We are analyzing these recent, very public statements about a proposed $2,000 stimulus check or dividend or distribution.
Whatever you want to call it.
Right. And what this means in a practical sense for low-income, fixed-income, and middle-income citizens is really the most important thing, because this payment is intended specifically for you.
And we should probably stress that this isn't just a rumor. This information is getting traction for a good reason. It's coming directly from the top.
The president himself.
Exactly. The whole conversation just exploded because the president recently doubled down on this newly announced $2,000 payment.
But the first announcement was a little confusing.
It was very confusing. The initial post mentioned a dividend of at least $2,000 a person, not including high-income people, will be paid to everyone.
And that phrase, paid to everyone, that's what caused all the immediate confusion.
Right. Does everyone mean every single citizen? Is this some kind of universal basic income? The questions just started flying.
But then they put out a clarification. It came just a day later. And, it was critical because it really refined the focus.
It did. The next post narrowed down the audience. It stated that the distribution would be funded by, and I'm quoting here, all money left over from the $2,000 payments made to low and middle income USA citizens from the massive tariff income.
So there it is. That specific phrase, low and middle income. That is the key that unlocks the real intent here.
And that shift, from everyone to low and middle income USA citizens, that's not a small detail. It's a major policy refinement.
What does it signal to you?
It signals that the administration saw the initial ambiguity and they decided to be very, very specific about which economic groups they're trying to help.
So they're focusing on means-tested assistance.
Exactly. This is not a universal handout.
And this connects directly to, the thousands of questions we've been getting. We know that if you are on a fixed income, if you get Social Security or SSI or SSDI, the one question you always have is,
will we get it?
Will we get it?
Right.
Every single time. And this shift to specifically saying low and middle income, that offers a pretty significant beacon of hope.
It really does. But it also means we have to look very closely at what those terms actually mean in the context of, a federal financial distribution.
Historically, when the government talks about relief for low-income and fixed-income people, what does that usually point to?
It's a strong signal. It's not direct, but it's a very strong indirect signal that people who rely on federal benefits from the Social Security Administration, the VA, railroad retirement, they are the intended recipients.
Because the benefits themselves pretty much define your income level.
By their very nature, right. These benefits place recipients squarely in that low to middle income demographic as long as, they fall below whatever that high income cutoff ends up being.
Okay, so let's dive into the nuts and bolts of the payment itself. Section 1 is all about defining this $2,000 proposal.
Right. It's been called a stimulus check, a dividend, a rebate.
The label doesn't really matter.
Not really. The fundamental promise is the same, a direct cash payment of at least $2,000 per eligible person.
And that at least is an interesting little detail.
It is fascinating, isn't it? It implies that $2,000 is the floor, not the ceiling. Maybe the final amount could be higher depending on how much tariff revenue they actually collect.
But for now, we have to focus on the $2,000 figure.
Right. For any kind of financial modeling, we have to use that number. But the clearest rule they've set so far is the exclusion.
The explicit exclusion.
This payment is not including high-income people. That is the only solid stated rule we have right now about who's in and who's out.
And that circles us right back to the target confirmation. The recipients are low and middle income USA citizens,
Which moves the whole discussion away from a universal payment.
which would be astronomically expensive.
Unbelievably so. And it moves it toward a means-tested approach that's based just on income.
This reliance on an income metric, it's pretty standard for the federal government, right?
Oh, it's standard operating procedure. We saw it during the pandemic with all 3 rounds of stimulus checks. Income is consistently the easiest, most objective factor they can use for mass distribution.
So how do they check that?
They look at your adjusted gross income, your AGI, on your most recent tax filing. Or they can look at the income data that the SSA or the VA already has on file for you.
And this is where we really need to focus for everyone listening who's on a fixed income.
Yes.
The president did not say you have to file a tax return. He didn't mention specific benefits like SSI or SSDI, which are already, highly income sensitive. The focus is purely on the level of income.
That's the key.
If you are low or middle income, you are the target. It doesn't matter where that income comes from.
And that omission, leaving out the tax return requirement, that's a huge positive for our fixed income audience.
Why is that?
Because in past distributions, requiring a tax return created massive headaches. Just huge hurdles for seniors and low-income Americans who often don't even meet the filing threshold.
So they fall through the cracks.
They do. By simplifying it down to just income level, it suggests they're aiming for a more streamlined process. They'll likely just use existing government databases to find who's eligible.
Which would include everyone getting monthly federal benefits?
It should, yes.
But there's a big shadow hanging over this whole conversation.
The cutoff.
The cutoff. We don't have an exact dollar amount for what high income means. They've defined the group by exclusion. You get it if you're not high income, but we don't know where that line in the sand is.
And until that number is defined, everything is just speculation. And that speculation is, it's really stressful for people who are counting on this potential payment.
It is.
That one line, that number, it defines the entire scope of the program, the total cost, the number of people who get a check. So to move forward, we have to apply some historical context, look at what the government has done before, and make a highly educated prediction.
Which brings us right to the most important question for our listeners. Eligibility.
Exact.
So let's turn to Section 2. Eligibility and income threshold speculation. For anyone relying on benefits, figuring out where that line will be drawn is, it's the difference between getting $2,000 and getting nothing.
And let's be perfectly clear, no official cutoff has been announced. But, when you're talking about large-scale financial disbursements like this, the government typically relies on established criteria. It's about efficiency and consistency.
The best way to predict the future is to look at the past.
Precisely.
So what did that history tell us? If we look at the 3 rounds of stimulus checks during the pandemic,
Which were very recent.
very recent, the income thresholds they used were remarkably consistent across all 3 payments.
And they were aimed at the exact same groups. Middle and low-income households who were struggling.
So, based on that, what can we project?
Well, based on those past federal actions, we can anticipate a very specific structure. For an individual, the high-income cutoff would likely be drawn somewhere around $75,000 a year in adjusted gross income.
$75,000 for a single filer. What about a married couple?
For a married couple filing jointly, that cutoff would probably be set at or very near $150,000 per year. This is the model they've used multiple times. It's tried and true.
We have to stress these are still speculative numbers.
They are, but they are robust predictions. The source material we're looking at notes that setting these kinds of cutoffs would make, and I quote, a couple 100 million people eligible.
And that lines up with the massive scale they're talking about.
It does. If the numbers were lower, say $40,000 for an individual, the distribution would be much smaller, much cheaper. But $75,000, that seems to be the historical sweet spot.
Let's give our listeners some context for that number.
Please. It's important. The average household income in the U.S. last year was around $83,000.
Okay, so if your individual income is $75,000, you are still below the national household average.
Exactly. Which means it is highly, highly unlikely that incomes of, say, $60,000 or $70,000 would be considered high income.
They'd fall squarely in the middle income bracket. It would make no sense, politically or economically, to set a high-income cutoff that's below the average household's earnings.
And this, right here, this is the central point of reassurance for our fixed income audience.
Go on.
If you're on fixed income, if you receive Social Security retirement or SSI or SSDI, your income is, by definition, usually far, far below that national average.
The average Social Security check is what, about $1,800 a month?
Around there, yes, which comes out to less than $22,000 a year, and SSI is significantly lower than that.
So that puts you firmly in the low-income bracket. You are nowhere near that anticipated $75,000 cutoff for an individual.
Not even close. Based on the explicit language, low and middle income, people getting fixed benefits are strongly, strongly implied to be the intended recipients. Your financial situation is often the very reason you get these benefits in the first place. You are the demographic they are trying to help.
So we can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that if this proposal passes with thresholds, like we've seen before,
you, the fixed income recipient, should consider yourself a primary target for this payment. The uncertainty really isn't about your income status. It's about the political will and, well, the financial capability to actually pull off a payment this big.
So we've answered that core question. The proposal is targeting you. But none of it matters if the government can't actually pay for it.
And that brings us to the most complex and, frankly, contentious part of this deep dive.
The financial engine.
Section 3. The financial engine. We have to talk about the money. Specifically, how they plan to fund these $2,000 payments using massive tariff income.
This is the really new part of the plan. It's what separates it from past stimulus ideas.
It's new and, you could argue, pretty risky.
Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers we have are just staggering.
They are. The U.S. has brought in about $195 billion in tariff revenues just so far this year.
$195 billion.
To put that in perspective, revenues are averaging about $1 billion a day.
$1 billion a day.
Or roughly $30 billion a month flowing into the U.S. Treasury just from tariffs.
And if that pace continues,
if it's sustained, the U.S. is on track to bring in about $350 billion over a full 12-month period.
But the political math they're using is even bigger than that.
Much bigger. They're using long-term projections. The government is apparently expecting over $3 trillion in tariff revenues over the next 10 years.
$3 trillion. That's a massive figure. But let's compare it to the immediate cost of this plan.
We have to.
So we need to figure out the total price tag. To do that, we need to estimate how many people would be eligible.
And for that, we can look back at a historical metric. The last big one, the $1,400 stimulus check, went out about 5.5 years ago.
And it reached about 85% of the population.
Right. That historical benchmark accounted for about 284 million people in the country who got a check. And that includes dependents who qualified.
So even if this new low and middle income definition excludes some high earners, 284 million is still a really solid high-end estimate.
It's the maximum number of people who might get a $2,000 payment.
So let's do the math. We take that maximum estimate, 284 million people, we multiply that by the proposed $2,000.
And you get a colossal number.
$568 billion. That's what the government would need to finance the full distribution.
And here is the immediate, unavoidable mathematical problem.
The snag.
The snag. If we look at the cash flow right now, the current annual projection for tariff revenue is $350 billion.
Okay, so $350 billion in a year, but they need $568 billion.
Right. $350 billion is only about 61% of what they need for a full immediate distribution. And even worse, they've only collected $195 billion so far this year.
So if they wanted to send the checks today, They are short by over $370 billion.
Logically, mathematically, based on the current balance sheet, the money is simply not there. It's not sitting in an account waiting to be sent out.
So they can't fund it with cash on hand.
No. The only way this $500 billion disbursement actually works is if they use that $3 trillion projection over the next decade.
The long-term number makes the short-term payment possible.
It makes it feasible, yes, because it can be paid back over many years. And the mechanism to do that, to make a payment today when the cash isn't there, is what's known in government finance as borrowing against future revenue.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase, borrowing against future revenue. It's a crucial detail. It sounds a bit like free money, but it's not.
It is definitely not free money. It means the government has to issue new treasury bonds. Essentially, they have to take out a loan for the full $568 billion that they need today.
So they take out this huge loan.
Precisely. They take out the loan today, they send out the $2,000 payments, and then they dedicate the future incoming tariff revenue, that $30 billion a month, to paying off the interest and the principal of that $500 billion loan over time.
So the immediate implication here is that this distribution would be financed by adding the full cost to the national debt today.
Yes. The debt increases by over $500 billion right now. And then the future tariff revenues are earmarked to pay down that specific piece of the debt over the next 10 years. It's a cash flow mechanism, not a cash reserve mechanism.
And this brings up some serious economic friction, doesn't it? The whole idea of tariffs is controversial.
It's very controversial. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods. When the government charges a tariff on, say, imported steel or electronics, who actually pays that tax?
The consumer, usually.
It's usually the importer, who then passes that cost directly along to the American consumer through higher prices.
That's a critical point. The opposition will definitely raise this. If the funding for this $2,000 dividend is tariffs, doesn't that mean that low- and middle-income Americans are basically paying for it themselves?
Through higher prices at the store.
Right. The money isn't coming out of thin air. It's being redirected from consumer spending.
That is the central legitimate critique of this financing model. You're creating an invisible tax that could push up the cost of living, which is the very thing this dividend is supposed to help with.
It's a political tightrope. Give a direct check that's funded by an indirect tax.
A very tricky tightrope. And beyond that, you also have to question how stable that $3 trillion projection is.
That assumes nothing changes for 10 years.
It assumes global trade relations, current tariff levels, everything stays stable for a full decade. If trade agreements change, there's a global recession. If our trading partners retaliate with their own tariffs.
That $3 trillion projection could just evaporate.
It could. And the debt they use to fund the $568 billion payment, that remains.
So it's a risky financial move.
It's very risky. The ability to point to a specific revenue stream, the tariffs gives the proposal a lot of political strength. It looks like it's self-financing. But the economic reality is that relying on that future volatile revenue stream creates a lot of long-term fiscal instability.
And let's not forget the final twist in all this. The president also suggested that after sending out the $2,000 payments, there would still be money left over from the tariffs to pay down the national debt.
Which is a huge claim. That implies one of two things. Either they think that $3 trillion projection is actually conservative and the tariffs will bring in way more than they need for the payout, or they expect the actual cost of the distribution to be much lower than our $568 billion estimate. Maybe they plan to exclude dependents or set the income cutoff much lower than $75,000.
Either way, the narrative they're building is powerful.
It's incredibly powerful that they've found this massive, untapped revenue stream that can solve both the need for individual relief and the national debt problem at the same time.
It's a very compelling political promise, but it relies on a very aggressive financial model.
And it raises the political stakes exponentially, which leads us right into our fourth section.
Political context.
And the likelihood that this actually gets done.
Okay, let's pivot to the political realities. Section 4. The political context and likelihood of execution. The long-term math might work, but the political credibility clock is ticking right now.
Loudly.
Very loudly. If they can point to $3 trillion in revenue, why haven't they acted already?
This is where the history becomes so important. The materials we're looking at stress that this is now the fourth time the president has endorsed a proposal to distribute money like this in the thousands of dollars in less than a year.
Since the end of January. 4 major endorsements.
4 times in 10 months. That repetition is what gives this proposal both its incredible weight and its potential to just collapse if it fails.
They're sending a very strong, very consistent message.
A message they have to be prepared to back up with action.
So let's walk through the 4 endorsements, because the evolution of this promise is key to understanding how serious this latest version is.
Absolutely. The first one was way back in February. It was the $5,000 Doge dividend proposal.
Crypto dividend.
Right. It was non-traditional, very speculative. It was basically a trial balloon, but it established the idea of a large-scale distribution endorsement early in the year.
And it evaporated pretty quickly.
It did. It wasn't tied to a real funding source, just a volatile asset. Then, the second attempt came in August. That was the proposal for a $600 rebate check.
This one was more formal, right? It was an actual bill.
It was. It was formally introduced as the American Worker Rebate Act of 2025 by Senator Josh Hawley. The president endorsed it, so the idea moved from just speculation into actual legislative backing.
Okay, so we've gone from a crypto idea to a formal bill. The concept is getting more conventional.
And then the third one followed on October 2nd, just a few weeks ago. In a separate interview, the president mentioned a distribution or a dividend of somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000.
So he kept the idea alive, and he bumped the number up.
He did. It signaled that this financial aid idea was still moving, and moving toward that $2,000 mark, even while the $600 proposal was still technically on the table.
And that brings us to number 4. The current proposal, made around November 9th and 10th.
This is the one. The concrete at least $2,000 dividend. And now it's explicitly tied to a specific quantified funding mechanism, the tariff revenue, and it's targeting low and middle income citizens.
So what does this pattern tell us?
It shows a sustained, escalating commitment to the idea. The dollar amount has generally gone up, and the funding source has gotten more and more specific, from vague ideas to a defined, massive revenue stream.
But repeating the promise like this creates a huge political credibility problem, doesn't it?
A massive one.
For someone on a fixed income, budgeting from one check to the next, hearing a promise of $2,000 4 times in a year, that creates a lot of hope.
And a lot of expectation. The messaging is, it's great, it's awesome, it addresses a critical need for so many people struggling with costs right now. But here's the political reality. If they do not follow through this time, it is going to be a really, really bad messaging campaign that will cost them a ton of credibility with a really vital group of voters.
This is all about political risk management. The more you float a popular idea like this, the higher the expectation gets, and the harder the political damage if you fail to deliver.
They've essentially bet their political capital on delivering some form of relief. The analogy that's been used to describe this is perfect. Lawmakers are painting themselves into a corner.
If they have this $3 trillion revenue stream, and they've identified a $500 billion need, and they still fail to deliver,
they risk becoming the kid who cried wolf. The electorate, especially those people who are counting on this payment, they will simply stop believing any future financial promises.
the only way out of that corner is to act, to deliver. If they fail on this 4th promise, especially now that it's so specific, $2,000 low and middle income funded by tariffs, it just suggests a deep disconnect between what they're promising and what they can actually do.
So for everyone listening, what does this all mean? It means that while the proposal is very exciting and it's targeted directly at you, its history shows it's still just a proposal until someone takes action.
But the stakes are higher now.
The political consequences of inaction are exponentially higher than they were with the first 3 more vague endorsements. The pressure to deliver is massive, and maybe, just maybe, it's enough to actually push a bill forward this time.
And we have to circle back to that debt reduction claim.
We do.
He isn't just promising a check. He's promising a check and fiscal responsibility. The idea that even after this huge distribution, there will be enough money left over to pay down the national debt.
That political combination is incredibly potent, but it adds another layer of scrutiny. They've promised to solve 2 huge problems with one single, very controversial funding source.
The narrative is that they've found this magic bullet.
The tariffs. This massive, newly generated revenue stream that can satisfy the demand for individual relief and address the national debt at the same time. But that narrative requires the numbers to actually add up in the real world.
Because if they borrow the $568 billion today, and that tariff revenue stream collapses in a few years,
the credibility loss will be severe, and the national debt will be left holding the bag.
Okay. We've covered eligibility, the income speculation, the math, and the political pressure. Let's synthesize all of this to give you the essential facts you need to monitor this situation.
Let's do it.
All right, let's summarize the key facts for you to take away from this deep dive. We want to give you absolute clarity on where this proposal stands right now.
First, let's talk about the amount.
First, the amount. The proposal specifies a direct dividend payment of at least $2,000 per person. That's the minimum. It's a significant amount of financial relief.
Second, the recipients. The president has clarified the target audience. It is low and middle income USA citizens.
And based on historical metrics and the national average income, this strongly implies that the intended recipients include you if you were on a fixed income benefit like Social Security, SSI, or SSDI.
Assuming they use thresholds like they have in the past, you are very likely eligible if your individual income is below that speculated high income cutoff of around $75,000.
Third, the funding mechanism. The engine for this is massive tariff revenue. Now, while the projections show a potential $3 trillion over 10 years, the current annual intake is about $350 billion.
Which is not enough to fund the estimated $568 billion cost immediately.
So they can't pay for this with cash on hand.
No. To deliver the payment today, the government would have to borrow the money up front. That means adding the cost to the national debt and then dedicating the future tariff collections to paying down that new debt over time.
So it's a debt-financed distribution.
Guaranteed by future trade revenue, which, as we discussed, introduces volatility and controversy.
And fourth, the political status.
Yeah.
It is still a proposal.
But
it's not just any proposal. This is the fourth time the president has endorsed a significant financial distribution in less than a year. The specificity of the funding and the target audience makes this the most actionable and the most politically consequential of all four promises.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought, something for you to really think about as you watch this news unfold.
Go on.
Given the detailed financial figures that are now attached to this proposal, the hard numbers, the $3 trillion projection versus the $568 billion need, does this mathematical feasibility, even if it is future dependent, make this proposal more or less likely to pass than the previous, less specific promises?
That's a great question. The existence of a clear, quantified funding stream, even a controversial one, it changes the entire legislative calculus.
It does. It moves the discussion from where do we find the money to how do we structure the borrowing. It shifts the argument from it's too expensive to we don't trust your funding source.
A different kind of fight.
A very different kind of fight. And the ultimate question for you, the listener, and for the entire political establishment is this. How long can a government risk losing credibility before they are forced to act on a highly anticipated promise that's directed squarely at the fixed income and vulnerable people in this country?
The pressure to deliver has never been higher.
And the financial figures that they themselves have put forward are what's applying that intense pressure.
We are going to continue to watch this very, very closely. As soon as a high-income cutoff is officially announced or a formal bill is introduced in Congress, we will bring you that update immediately. This is potentially life-changing money for millions of people, and you deserve to know the facts as soon as they emerge. Thank you for joining. Okay, let's just jump right into this, because the financial rumor mill has been spinning completely out of control, and you, especially those of you relying on fixed incomes like Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, you need clarity. And you need it right now. We are talking about a major high-profile financial discussion that could potentially put a dividend of at least $2,000 directly into your pocket.
That's right. That is the core update we're tracking. We've seen a really significant political endorsement behind a proposal for a $2,000 dividend payment. Or you could call it a rebate. And crucially, the language has started to solidify. It now specifies that this payment is targeted directly at low and middle income U.S. citizens.
Which focuses the relief where the need is really the most acute. And, you know, that clarification is everything. I mean, if you are a senior living on a fixed retirement benefit, or if you're a person with a disability on SSDI or SSI, you've been asking that one single burning question. Am I included in this? Is this money finally for me? Especially when we're all watching inflation just continue to eat away at our buying power for, you know, essentials like food and medicine.
And that really defines our mission for this deep dive. We're going to get into the exact language used in the most recent post, the official statements surrounding this, to try and eliminate all that ambiguity. We need to define as best we can who is included in low and middle income. We have to analyze this really unprecedented funding mechanism using massive tariffs. And then finally, we have to talk about the reality of when or, if this $2,000 boost could actually arrive.
The stakes are just incredibly high for millions of Americans. So stay tuned, because the deep dive into the proposed $2,000 payment starts now. We're aiming to give you the comprehensive, actionable clarity you need. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, our focus is razor sharp on a major financial proposal that has really been dominating the conversation. We've taken a look at recent public statements, social media posts from high-level political figures, all about this massive proposed distribution plan. And our goal isn't just to report what's being said, it's to translate the policy talk into something tangible, something you can actually understand, especially for our community of fixed-income listeners.
Right. The mission here is to dissect the specifics of this proposed $2,000 dividend payment and really clarify what the implications are for you. I mean, when the cost of living feels like it's going up every single month, a $2,000 payment is not a small thing. It's not just a talking point. It could genuinely be the difference between catching up on bills that are past due and, spiraling into even greater financial hardship.
That's why the details matter so much.
They really do.
And what grabs your attention immediately is that central figure. A proposal for a $2,000 dividend distribution or rebate per person. We're not talking about some marginal tax break that you might not even feel in your paycheck. This is a sum of money endorsed to go directly into citizens' hands. And it specifically targets those who are struggling the most right now with the persistent draining effects of inflation.
And that direct cash injection model is critical here. It's designed for immediate impact. We know from past economic relief efforts that direct payments like this are, they're highly effective at providing instant financial relief, and they often inject immediate spending power right back into local economies, which is, the stated goal behind this kind of action.
Now, here's where the proposal took a turn that is, I think, profoundly beneficial for our core audience.
Yeah.
Initially, the public discussion was about a payment being made to, and the quote was, everyone, not including high-income people.
Yeah.
That generic term, everyone, it left a huge number of our listeners, Social Security, SSI disability recipients, just wondering about their status.
Absolutely, especially if they didn't file traditional income taxes or just felt, generally overlooked by these broad stimulus measures in the past.
Exactly.
And that ambiguity, that was a major source of concern for so many people. And that's precisely why the subsequent, and I think very deliberate clarification is so crucial. The language was refined. More recent posts and comments specifically stated the payments would be made to low and middle income USA citizens.
And that's a huge shift.
It's a profound policy signal. It shifts the primary metric of eligibility squarely onto financial need. It sort of bypasses that old, confusing tax filer versus non-filer debate that complicated so many of the past relief rounds.
So for our listeners who are low income or on a fixed income, this directly answers that lingering question, right?
Yeah.
Will we get it? By identifying low and middle income specifically, the proposal seems to intentionally guarantee inclusion for these financially vulnerable groups.
That transition from everyone to low and middle income, that's not an accidental change in wording. It's not a slip of the tongue. It's a decisive, intentional move. It's designed to reassure people on federal benefits. We have to understand that when the proponents of this plan use this language, they're tacitly acknowledging that the vast majority of those on Social Security, SSDI, and SSI inherently fall into those brackets. They are speaking directly to you.
So if you are a fixed income recipient, this targeted language is probably the strongest signal you could get that you would be a primary beneficiary if this plan moves forward. It's a political commitment that really hinges eligibility on need, not just on whether or not you filed a tax return last year.
And to really grasp the seriousness behind this $2,000 proposal, we have to look beyond just the dollar amount. We have to examine the source of the communication and its history of repetition. The most recent and critical clarification, the one that confirmed the focus on low and middle income, that was relayed via a recent post on the social media platform Truth Social.
And the specific language in that post is what we really have to analyze closely. It confirmed the demographic, and it also preemptively addressed the financing. It said, quote, all money left over from the $2,000 payments made to low and middle income USA citizens from the massive tariff income. That one sentence, it serves as the policy anchor. It gives us the target low and middle income, And it clearly links the payment to a very specific, I would say unconventional, funding mechanism, massive tariff income.
Yeah.
The very fact that this specific official public statement exists elevates the whole proposal. It's no longer just political chatter. It's a concrete, defined intent.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because this isn't just some flash-in-the-pan idea that popped up last week.
Right.
Our sources are confirming this is the fourth time in less than a year, specifically since late January, that the idea of distributing thousands of dollars directly to the public has been seriously endorsed or floated by this specific political sphere.
That signals a sustained, consistent policy drive. It indicates significant momentum and I think a high internal priority.
A pattern is definitely forming.
It is. And if we connect this repetition to the broader policy landscape, it demonstrates a pattern that generates real political weight. Let's quickly outline the previous 3 times this idea came up, because they really show the progression toward what we're seeing now. So first, back in February, this was the initial high-dollar concept. It involved a proposed $5,000 Doge dividend.
Right, I remember that one. It was a little out there.
It was. And while the funding mechanism mentioned then was rooted in the niche and pretty volatile world of digital currency, the underlying endorsement was clear. A large, direct cash dividend was the goal. It sort of established the upper boundary for the dollar amount.
Okay, then things started getting a bit more traditional, a bit more grounded in actual legislative mechanisms.
Exactly. Then in August, we saw the endorsement of the $600 rebate check proposed by Senator Josh Hawley. That was under the American Worker Rebate Act of 2025. That iteration showed there was a political appetite for formal legislation, even if the amount was smaller. It was a move from a broad concept towards something that could actually be a legislative reality.
A more realistic number, maybe.
Perhaps. Then the third iteration, that was on October 2nd. An indication was made during a separate interview that a dividend distribution would fall specifically between $1,000 and $2,000. And this was a crucial signaling event. It tightened the projected amount, it moved the floor up from that $600 number, and it made the potential payout sound much more achievable.
Which brings us to where we are now, the current proposal in November. The dividend has settled at a high figure, at least $2,000 for low and middle income citizens. This repetition, the steady increase in specificity, the clarification of who it's for, these are all key political signals.
And what's fascinating is the sheer consistency, especially in targeting the low-income community. This high-frequency specific messaging has an inevitable consequence. It creates a tremendous level of expectation among the target audience, our listeners who are watching this whole conversation so closely to, shape their own financial outlook.
Yeah, the political cost of not delivering on this is growing with every single mention.
Exponentially.
It's moving from just being a political talking point into what many people are hearing as a concrete promise. Like the source material suggested, this repetition means the political figures involved are, well, they're painting themselves into a corner. The expectation is built. And now, delivery is essentially required to maintain any credibility.
And that, ironically, is what makes the possibility of this payment very real, even if the timeline is still so uncertain. All right, so now we move to what is probably the most critical section for our listeners: eligibility. When we talk about low and middle income, the specific concerns we hear come from recipients of Social Security retirement benefits, individuals on SSDI, those on SSI, seniors, people with disabilities, all relying on federal benefits.
And understanding the differences in those benefit types is really crucial to figuring out eligibility.
It is.
So let's start with that key distinction. We have to reiterate that the primary metric for a general stimulus distribution, like we've seen in the past, is almost always total annual income. The specific benefit you receive is secondary to your income level. If your total income falls below whatever this proposed high-income threshold is, you're eligible, period.
That distinction is paramount. It's so important, especially for those who might confuse the different types of federal assistance. Let's break it down. Think of it this way. SSI, or Supplemental Security Income, is a strictly need-based program. It has very stringent asset limits. Right now, it's $2,000 for an individual, and very strict income ceilings. So if you are an SSI recipient, by definition, you are already classified as low income. You would certainly qualify.
Okay, that's clear for SSI. But what about Social Security Retirement, or SSDI? Those are based on your past earnings and your work history. So those recipients aren't automatically defined as low income.
Right. That's correct. They aren't automatically defined that way, but the reality is that the vast majority of those recipients still receive benefits that place them well within the lower to middle income bracket, especially when you factor in fixed costs and rising inflation. The common denominator for all these groups is that their annual income often falls far, far below the thresholds that would categorize them as high income.
So the bottom line is, if the payment is genuinely targeted at low and middle income, then the inclusion of almost all fixed income beneficiaries is, well, it's highly probable.
It's almost a certainty by design.
Okay, let's move into the realm of, let's call it educated speculation. The current proposal doesn't have a defined dollar amount for what high income is. But we can use historical precedent and current economic data to make a pretty good guess at this critical cutoff.
We can. And based on how the government has structured previous blanket income cutoffs for direct payments, we can speculate with some confidence that the high income cutoff will likely be set around $75,000 a year for individuals, and probably around $150,000 a year for married couples who are filing jointly.
So why that number? Why does $75,000 keep popping up in these kinds of relief bills?
Well, it serves as a historical benchmark. It's often seen as the point where economic hardship is statistically assumed to lessen. But more than that, setting the ceiling near $75,000 is politically and economically rational. Last year, the average U.S. household income was cited as being around $83,000.
So you can't set the middle income cutoff below the actual national average.
You can't. A plan focused on low and middle income has to ensure that the threshold isn't set below the national average, or it completely fails its objective. Setting it at $75,000 ensures that a huge portion of the middle class is included, right alongside almost all fixed income beneficiaries.
So I think this is the most reassuring point for our entire fixed income community. Given that most Social Security or SSDI beneficiaries typically get annual benefits well below, say, $30,000, and SSI recipients are even lower by law, virtually the entire fixed income demographic would automatically fall well within the low or middle income categories. If this plan is enacted, your eligibility is effectively guaranteed.
And that's exactly the message the proponents are aiming for. By explicitly mentioning low and middle income individuals, they have politically committed to covering this financially vulnerable community.
Okay, moving on to the practical side of this, the application. If this payment is approved, will our seniors or disabled listeners have to go through some complex, bureaucratic application process?
This is where prior experience gives us a lot of confidence. We can strongly stress that based on all the preceding stimulus rounds, no application would be needed for the vast majority of people already receiving benefits. So Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA. The government already has your income data. It has your direct deposit details through the SSA and VA systems.
So the payment would just be automatic.
It would be automatic, and it would likely be sent using the exact same method as your monthly benefit.
That would eliminate a massive administrative burden. I mean, it prevents a huge source of confusion and frustration for people who might struggle with complex paperwork.
It does. But, and this is a major caveat, since the plan is still just a proposal, specific administrative details are entirely unknown at this point. This includes things like how non-filers who don't get federal benefits might register, or how pro-rated payments for brand new recipients would be handled. We just don't know that yet.
So we're really just relying on the expectation that the payment system will mimic the speed and simplicity of previous emergency distributions.
Yes, with the SSA and the VA acting as the primary distributors for their beneficiaries. So while we wait for that final defined income cutoff, the high probability of inclusion for our fixed income audience, that remains the central takeaway on eligibility.
All right, now we have to address the mechanism that elevates this proposal beyond just another spending bill. We need to talk about the funding. The proposal explicitly relies on a source of revenue that, well, it hasn't been used for this kind of direct cash injection in generations.
That's right. The proposed funding source is a reliance on massive tariff income generated by the United States. A tariff is, essentially, it's a tax on imported goods. The political argument here is that this is an external revenue stream paid by importers, ideally, and so it doesn't require raising domestic income taxes or other taxes on U.S. citizens.
That's the theory. But let's ground this in the current numbers. Our source material indicates that the U.S. has brought in roughly $195 billion in tariff revenues so far this year.
Correct. And annual projections suggest the U.S. is on track to collect maybe $350 billion in tariff revenues over a full 12-month cycle.
Those are substantial figures, sure, but they seem to pale in comparison to what this dividend would actually cost.
We do. We have to walk through the critical math here. If we use the eligibility metric from the $1,400 stimulus check back in 2021, which covered about 85% of the population, totaling around 284 million people, once you include dependents, the numbers become staggering.
Okay, let's run those figures. You take 284 million eligible people, and you multiply that by the proposed $2,000 dividend. The total estimated cost for just this one round of payments shoots up to $568 billion.
More than $500 billion.
Right.
So we immediately see this massive disparity. The needed $568 billion is significantly higher than the $195 billion currently collected in tariffs this year, and it's substantially more than the full-year projection of $350 billion.
So the logical mathematical reality is that the required $568 billion is not currently sitting in a bank account somewhere ready for distribution today.
Not at all.
So this raises the really challenging question. How can this proposal guarantee an immediate $2,000 payment when the money, that $500 billion, clearly hasn't been collected yet? It seems like a massive fiscal hole.
And that's where the long-term financing plan comes into play. The proposal relies not on today's tariff revenue, but on the projected, guaranteed future revenue stream. The projection is that tariff revenues will reach an enormous $3 trillion over the next 10 years. Okay, so the government is basically using that future $3 trillion as collateral, which means the money isn't available right now. The government would have to borrow or front the money today to send out the payments quickly, and then use the next decade of tariff collection to pay back that initial loan.
Precisely. To make an immediate payment, the Treasury would effectively have to issue short-term debt, Treasury bills or notes, equivalent to the required $568 billion. You can think of the tariff revenue as a dedicated, guaranteed 10-year repayment plan.
So it's like putting a large necessary expense on a credit card.
That's a great way to put it. The government takes out a short-term loan today, knowing that this specific high-yield revenue stream will reliably pay off the balance over the next decade.
Okay, so this means the money gets into people's hands quickly.
Right.
But the short-term consequence is that this action would technically add to the national debt in the short term. In the short term, yes. Even though proponents argue that it's fully paid for by a dedicated revenue stream over the long term, which minimizes the impact on the general budget. But this policy is a huge shift. If we consider that historically, before the income tax era, tariffs were the primary source of federal revenue, now we're seeing them used not just for revenue, but as a specific tool for direct income redistribution.
And what's particularly interesting is that subtle detail in the proposal's language. The statement that any money left over after the $2,000 payments would be used to pay down the existing national debt.
Right. That speaks to the political confidence in this long-term revenue stream. They're not only confident that the tariff revenues will cover the $568 billion dividend, but that the surplus from that huge $3 trillion projection would be substantial enough to actively contribute toward deficit reduction.
And that gives them the political cover for the short-term borrowing needed to finance the immediate payouts.
Exactly. The math is complex, but the underlying confidence in the funding source is undeniable. So as we move from, feasibility to reality, we have to confront the biggest unknown, the wild card in all of this. Will this proposal actually be fulfilled? Despite the high frequency of endorsement, this plan is still just a proposal. It is not formalized policy or law.
And this brings us right back to the political messaging risk we talked about earlier. We've established this is the fourth time this idea has been endorsed in under a year. If the plan is not ultimately delivered, the political cost, as our sources suggest, will be measured in damaged credibility. It would be a really, really bad messaging campaign.
The risk of failure is severe for the political figures involved. They have, as we noted, painted themselves into a corner. They've significantly raised expectations among a deeply engaged and, frankly, financially vulnerable segment of the population.
Failure to deliver, especially after targeting the low-income demographic so explicitly, would risk a major erosion of trust.
It risks becoming the ultimate example of the boy who cried wolf, and it could potentially undermine future necessary relief efforts.
So for our listeners, this really means maintaining a stance of cautious optimism. The consistent messaging suggests high intent, but until a bill is passed and signed, nothing is guaranteed.
Exactly. Now, let's pivot to something incredibly important: financial protections. Since this is only a proposal, specific details about these protections are not finalized. However, based on the history of previous direct payments, we need to address 3 critical areas that must be included in any final legislation to protect our fixed income audience.
This is so critical. For those on fixed incomes, these protections are often the difference between the money being truly helpful and it just becoming an administrative nightmare. So what's the first essential protection?
First is taxability. Previous direct stimulus payments have almost universally been designated as tax-free. For low and fixed income individuals, it is absolutely essential that this $2,000 dividend remains non-taxable. This ensures the full benefit reaches you and doesn't complicate your tax situation or, potentially bump you into a different tax bracket.
And the second protection is arguably the most complex and critical for our listeners who receive means-tested benefits.
That is benefit eligibility protection. This is particularly for those receiving SSI, SNAP or food stamps, Medicaid, or housing assistance. These programs are all means-tested, which means your eligibility is based on having low income and low assets.
Right.
Without specific legislative protection, receiving a $2,000 lump sum could be disastrous. For example, SSI recipients are subject to that strict asset limit of just $2,000 for an individual. If you receive the $2,000 payment, your total countable assets could instantly exceed that $2,000 limit.
Which would make you temporarily ineligible for SSI.
Right, and crucially, it often forces you to lose your associated Medicaid coverage.
Losing essential health coverage like Medicaid over a one-time relief payment would just be a catastrophic net loss. It would completely defeat the purpose of the dividend.
It would. Therefore, the legislation has to actively and explicitly state that this dividend will not be counted as income or as a countable resource for a specified period, usually it's 12 months, for the purpose of determining eligibility for those programs.
That legal language is absolutely non-negotiable.
It has to be in there. If this plan is enacted without that explicit means testing waiver, it would harm the very people it's intended to help.
And the third essential protection relates to debt. We know our fixed income listeners are often battling medical debt, consumer debt. What about garnishment protection?
This is another major historical sticking point. In past relief rounds, we saw fierce battles to protect those funds from creditors. While some of the CARES Act payments had federal protection against garnishment by, say, federal agencies, state governments, and private debt collectors often tried to seize the funds the second they hit a bank account.
So the money needs to be protected from that.
It must be. If the $2,000 dividend is intended to provide breathing room, it has to be legally protected from seizure. The law must clearly state that these funds are exempt from collection by creditors' banks, private debt collectors, and in many state-level judgments.
This ensures the money goes toward your immediate needs, groceries, rent, utilities, instead of just servicing old debt.
These details, taxability, means testing, and garnishment protection, they are the legislative backbone of a truly helpful payment. We have to monitor the proposal to make sure these critical details are written in.
Absolutely.
Now, let's pivot with all the seriousness this deserves. Because this announcement is so high profile, because it involves a large, life-changing amount of money, and because it targets financially vulnerable populations, scams will follow immediately. This is our paramount warning.
We know that our listeners on fixed incomes are often targeted by these bad actors because of their perceived vulnerability and their reliance on government payments. We need to deliver this anti-scam advice with maximum clarity.
You must internalize this core, simple piece of advice. The Social Security Administration, the SSA, the IRS, the VA, or any official government agency will never initiate contact with you via a phone call, a text message, or an unsolicited email asking for money. They will not ask for your banking details, your Social Security number, or other sensitive personal information to get a payment like this $2,000 dividend.
They will not ask you to go buy gift cards. They will not demand you pay a processing fee to unlock the money. And they will never tell you to click a link in a text message to verify your identity. These are all immediate, 100% red flags.
If you are contacted suspiciously about the $2,000 dividend or any benefit update, assume it is a scam. Hang up the phone or delete the message immediately.
Only trust official letters delivered by the U.S. Postal Service or secure, verified government websites like the official My Social Security portal to manage your benefits and get updates.
We just cannot stress this enough. Protect your information. Being informed is your absolute best defense against these people.
Okay, we have completed our deep dive into the $2,000 dividend proposal, covering all the financial, political, and eligibility details. Before we wrap up, let's just quickly reinforce the core facts that you need to take away right now. First, the amount. This is a proposed dividend of at least $2,000 per person.
Second, eligibility. The proposal is now strongly targeted at low and middle income USA citizens. This gives us high confidence that fixed income beneficiaries, Social Security, SSI, SSDI will be included as long as your income is below that anticipated high income threshold, which we speculate is around $75,000 for individuals.
Third, funding. The proposed source is derived entirely from future tariff revenues, which are projected to reach $3 trillion over the next decade. However, this does mean the money has to be borrowed upfront, adding to the debt initially, but it's earmarked for repayment by those future revenues.
And fourth, status. It is absolutely crucial to remember that this is currently a proposal and an endorsement. It's been repeated 4 times, but it is not yet an official enacted law. We have to wait for the formal legislative process to finalize the details, including those essential protections we just discussed.
But even with that necessary caution, the repeated, specific messaging focused on low-income individuals, it provides a significant, genuine sign of hope. It signals a major political commitment to delivering substantial financial relief to the communities struggling the most with the current economic climate, a commitment that carries that massive political risk if it's not fulfilled.
And this commitment, it signals something really profound about the future of fiscal policy. It signals a willingness to use non-conventional means like a dedicated tariff stream to provide direct support to vulnerable populations.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you process all this information. Given the enormous financial projection, that $3 trillion in tariffs over 10 years, and the clear political commitment being made to this idea of direct, non-taxable dividends, the conversation is really shifting. It's moving from simply debating if relief is coming to how frequently and permanently dividend payments could become part of our nation's standard fiscal policy.
If this model proves successful funding direct, immediate relief to low-income citizens using a reliable, dedicated tariff revenue stream, it raises the distinct possibility that this could become a formalized, recurring, maybe semi-annual or annual dividend. Such a mechanism would provide predictable, structural support and stability for seniors and disabled Americans who often lack effective protection against persistent inflation.
And that prospect, a permanent mechanism for direct relief for those on fixed incomes, well, that changes everything about the future economic security of our community. We will continue to track this proposal and bring you immediate updates the moment eligibility details are solidified, the moment those critical protections are written into law, or when a timeline for the payment is finally announced. Thank you for trusting us. A major financial update has just hit the airwaves, and it's causing, well, a ripple of both hope and, frankly, a lot of confusion across the country. We are talking about a proposed $2,000 dividend payment.
A huge amount.
And it's aimed squarely at those on fixed and lower incomes.
And that amount, $2,000, it really is transformative for households living, paycheck to paycheck or relying solely on their fixed benefit.
Oh, absolutely.
If it materializes, it provides some critical breathing room. But we've actually gone beyond just vague promises this time. The sources we've analyzed, they offer new, really crucial information clarifying who exactly is the target audience.
We're going to be diving deep into the specifics of this $2,000 proposed check for you. But, and here's the immediate financial twist that complicates everything.
Right.
The money is proposed to come from massive, newly generated tariff revenues, which means this is not a traditional tax proposal at all.
And this specific funding mechanism, it's fascinating, but it immediately raises some pretty serious questions about the immediate feasibility. We're going to break down the cold, hard numbers for you.
Great.
We're talking hundreds of billions in revenues collected so far, the projected $568 billion cost, and this massive long-term financing plan that links this immediate relief to a staggering 10-year trade projection.
So if you are a listener who relies on Social Security, SSI, disability, or maybe VA benefits, or if you're just struggling with the relentless pressure of inflation, you need to stick with us. We are going to unpack the critical details about who qualifies, how this money is supposed to move from, tariff collection into your bank account, and the very serious political risks involved when a promise of this size is made over and over again. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is, let's say, laser-focused. We are performing a serious analytical review of these recent statements about a proposed $2,000 financial distribution.
A deep dive.
And this is specifically for low and middle income Americans. We're drawing solely from the source materials we've been provided just to cut through all the speculation and give you the facts, the figures, and most importantly, the financial implications for your household.
And the urgency of this discussion, it really can't be overstated. For the millions of you who rely on a fixed income, whether that's Social Security retirement, SSI, disability benefits, or low-income veterans benefits, the central pressing question is just, Will I get this $2,000 payment?
That's the question everyone's asking.
Exactly. Previous statements were, they were pretty vague. They painted the picture a little too broadly. But this new information we have, it clarifies the critical recipient base.
And that clarification is honestly the biggest piece of news to come out of this proposal yet. But before we get deeper into eligibility, we have to confront the funding reality.
We have to.
We need to move past the sort of immediate hope that the headlines generate and look at the financial mechanics. Before we even talked about income thresholds, we have to ask, is the current plan mathematically feasible for an immediate rollout? Or does it require some significant financial engineering? Because that's where the numbers get extremely complicated.
It absolutely forces us to analyze the stark difference between a political proposal that relies on these massive future revenue projections and the immediate financial reality of a multi-$100 billion distribution.
Right.
The sources are very specific that the funding source is tariffs. And if the money isn't there right now, today, the government has to employ a very specific type of financial strategy to bridge that gap. We have to dissect that revenue stream against the potential cost and do it rigorously.
Okay, let's do that. Let's unpack this, starting with the initial announcement, just so we can understand how this idea has evolved. This whole concept really exploded with the first post, which talked about a dividend of at least $2,000 a person. The initial, very broad caveat was that it would be paid to everyone, but explicitly, not including high-income people.
And that initial statement, while it was exciting, it was also strategically vague.
Of course.
It was designed to generate maximum broad-based interest, a large amount, available to almost everyone except the very wealthy. But that generality, it left the most vulnerable groups, the people on fixed benefits, the low-income retirees, feeling uncertain.
Because they're used to rules.
They're accustomed to very specific regulated eligibility rules, not broad, optimistic promises. They needed to know, does my fixed income count as not high income?
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for our listeners. Almost immediately after that first post, the proponent essentially doubled down on the promise, but, and this is key, significantly tightened the language in a follow-up post.
Yes.
This is the key clarification that is driving our deep dive today. The language shifted to state clearly that the money would go to low and middle income USA citizens.
And that language shift is absolutely critical. We have to emphasize this for our listener base. When the proponent moves from this general idea of everyone but the high income to explicitly naming low and middle income people,
it's a signal.
It's a huge signal. They're signaling their intent directly toward the very audience segment that includes the vast majority of Social Security recipients, fixed income retirees, beneficiaries, and others who are really struggling with rising costs. This moves the proposal from just a general populist idea to a targeted relief measure focused on economic distress.
We should also take a quick moment just to clarify the name game being played here in the source materials.
Good point.
The documents use several different terms for this proposed money. Stimulus check, dividend distribution, a rebate, or just a payment. Functionally, based on the description, it's intended to be a one-time lump sum direct financial transfer.
Right.
It's a distribution of collected tariff revenue. But the terminology itself, especially the use of dividend, I think that reflects the political framing of the whole proposal.
Precisely. The goal is the function, putting money into the hands of citizens, and quickly. However, the intentional use of dividend is vital because it attempts to link the payment directly to that specific tariff revenue stream.
Right.
It frames the payment as citizens receiving a share of government-collected income, rather than just deficit spending or a traditional stimulus, which is the mechanism we're going to scrutinize later when we get into the borrowing part of this.
Okay, so now we transition directly to the most personal question for everyone listening. Who qualifies? Section 2 is all about defining low and middle income, especially for those of you receiving fixed government benefits. The source confirms that the primary factor used to distribute previous large federal payments, and the anticipated factor here is simply income. That's the most straightforward and, frankly, the fastest metric for the government to use.
Income is the central metric because it's the simplest and most verifiable for a rapid federal distribution. The IRS already has those records. The Social Security Administration has income data on file. What's truly crucial here is how that in-kind definition intersects with fixed benefits like Social Security and SSI.
Okay.
The proponent's specific mention of low and middle income strongly suggests that groups receiving these benefits would almost certainly be included.
And why can we say that so confidently?
Because the entire premise of the Social Security and SSI systems is built around supporting individuals who have either retired or who can't earn substantial income because of a disability. By definition, if you're a sole Social Security recipient with no other significant income, you fall squarely into that low or fixed income bracket.
Right.
SSI, in particular, is a means-tested program designed specifically for the lowest income individuals. The source materials themselves acknowledge the huge volume of questions from these exact communities, people collecting Social Security or living on a low income asking, will we get it?
Here.
The inclusion of low income is their strongest signal yet that they are the intended recipients of this targeted relief.
So, with that being established, we move to the crucial unanswered question. What specific income level defines high income that would be excluded?
The line in the sand.
Exactly. If they're targeting low and middle income, where exactly is the line drawn to determine who is high income and therefore ineligible? We don't have a definitive number yet, but we can look at some powerful precedents.
We really have to rely on established federal mechanisms